Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Time flows on, as it always does. The pale pink hues of morning fade to blue sky, then melt to soft rose as Saul continues his journey west. Over and over, season after season, like the hands of some great clock, each cycle different, but always the same. Today was no different. The dawn heralded his coming. He stood proud in the noonday sky, and now I lay in bed watching him go, taking his light, his warmth with him. And here I am, left once again to the mercy of the creatures of the night, memory and despair. And still time continues its march. One by one, pinpricks of light pierce the veil of night, the vanguard of Luna's forces. More follow, more than anyone can count, more than the grains of sand upon the shore, until at last Luna herself appears. She fills the world with her ethereal splendor. Dim and mysterious, it pours through my bedroom window like molten silver, spills onto the floor, and floods each crevasse with her haunting glow. Another day gone, and still no sleep. I roll over, turning my back to the moonlight. Luna, I snort. Will-o-wisp that she is, she has no light of her own, only a twisted reflection of soul's brilliance. Her subjects, a faded mockery of the waking world. Shadows only. Ghosts. Shivering, I pull the blanket up over my head. I know it's futile, that it's a shield as false as Luna's light. It can't protect me. Nothing can. But like Saul, like Luna, my course is fixed. My end assured. So here I cower, like a frightened child, haunted by the incessant drumbeat of time, a rhythm that haunts my every thought, that chips away at my sanity like a miner's pick. Unheard in Saul's passing, but deafening in the silence of Luna's grace. The footsteps of fate. The echoes of doom measured by the soft ticking tock of the clock my grandfather passed to me when he died. The clock his father fashioned for him on the day of his birth. The clock that ticked away every second of his long life. That stopped cold the moment he died and refused to mark another second. No matter the horologist's ministrations. Now alive, without winding, without coaxing, it refuses to fall silent. Even after the fury I unleashed upon it with my axe, its heartbeat pounds on. Its face, glass and wood, unmarred. A nemesis I cannot be rid of. And oh, how I've tried. No one will buy it. No one will take it. Even those that did come, drawn by my ad online, could barely bring themselves to look at it, much less touch it, as if the clock itself exudes some hidden light that blinds the inner eye. They left without so much as uttering a sound. When all else failed, I loaded it into the back of my Peugeot and drove it to the landfill. With a sigh of relief, I watched it roll down the side of a heap of garbage, slam into an old bed spring, and bounce out of sight. My heart sang as I drove home, only to find it where it stands now, off the foot of my bed, undamaged, still ticking. But its tone changed that day, deepened, so that each tick echoes through my very soul. I can no longer bring myself to touch it. Even the thought squirms from my mind like a terrified worm. And somehow, I know that if I moved, if I sold this house or simply left, it would follow me. 2 chimes, thick and heavy, slice through the silence of the night, cold as death's own scythe. My hand gropes through the sheets, searching for her, for comfort, but find only the cold shell of what was. She's not there. Of course not. My arm curls tight against my chest. She's where she always is at this time, dragged from her rest by the demons I gave her, haunted by the pain I caused. 3 heartbeats of the clock pass in silence. I lift my head from the pillow, my ears probing the darkness between ticks. 4, 5. The furnace rumbles to life. 6. The hushed whistle of wind whines against the eaves beyond my window. 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence. Licking my lips, I slip the blanket down past my nose. Something's changed. A dim glimmer of hope sparks to life deep within my chest. She's never gone this long past the chime. 11. My ears ache with the strain of listening. 12. I jolt upright. She's not playing. She's not there. Heart pounding, I toss the blankets aside, flop my legs over the side of the bed, and jam my toes into my slippers. But then I hear it. A single note, soft and low, sounds from the piano downstairs. It dances through Luna's domain like a forlorn howl, followed by the first chords of her favorite song. Our song. The flame in my chest turns to ice, a biting cold that surges through my veins in pulsating shards. Eyes burning, I collapse back onto the pillow and wrap myself in a cocoon. But I can't swallow the tears. I can't undo what I've done. Her playing grows louder, loud enough to drown even the ticking of the clock. My own stifled sobs, my whispered pleas for mercy, for forgiveness, my broken declarations of love. And I do love her, more than anything. I always have, ever since we were children, before I even knew what love was. The girl next door, whose mother was always falling or running into things, who always wore long sleeves and sunglasses to hide the bruises. The woman whose breath smelled funny, whose eyes never smiled. The notes linger on, and again I'm drawn back to the morning that changed everything. The morning I stood beside my bed, staring at a row of Polaroids laid out on the sheets. Cool leaves, clouds, a weird bug, and her. But I wasn't sure which one she'd like. "It's 5 till. Out the door, mister." Mom's last warning. "Coming." With a single motion, I swept the pictures into a pile, closed them safely inside my trapper keeper, and ran outside as fast as I could, jamming everything into my backpack as I bolted out the door. I made it to the corner just as the bus rolled to a stop. The other kids from the neighborhood were already waiting when I arrived, but not her. I squinted back up the block, wondering if I should have waited for her. But I barely made it as it was, and missing the bus was one rule I knew better not press. The doors folded open, the other kids shuffled onto the bus ahead of me. I tossed one last glance toward her house, and her front door burst open. Yes! I jumped up the steps and tugged the driver's sleeve. "She's not sick. She's just not running so fast. Don't leave without her." If he responded, I didn't hear it. I skipped down the aisle, flumped into my usual spot, and flopped my bag on the seat beside me. It was her seat, and hers alone. Even if she was sick, it was still hers. A few seconds later, her head poked up over the railing. She thanked the driver for waiting and slumped down the aisle. "Hey!" I snatched my bag, flopped it on my lap, and opened the zipper. "I got him." Her mouth twisted into a strange frowning pucker as she sat down, but she didn't answer, didn't look at me. I slipped out my trapper, ripped open the Velcro, and spread out the pictures so she could see them. "Which one you want?" She leaned over and pressed her finger against the edge of the picture I took of her last week on the playground. Her knees bent below the swing, hair trailing behind her head like a kite's tail, eyes bright and smiling. She pinched the corner and lifted it from the rest, but she didn't say a word, only brushed her hair down below her ear. I stared at the picture, her face, and smiled. It almost seemed to capture the sound of her laugh, the taste of the ice cream we had when we got home. That was a good day. She nodded. A dark purple spot, bigger than my thumb, peeked out from under her hair as she moved. Just seeing it made my neck hurt. What happened? She dropped the picture and tugged her hair forward before the words even left my mouth. I caught her hand. You getting clumsy like your mom? She jerked away. Her chin shook, and without a single word, she ran to the back of the bus. I didn't follow. She didn't speak to me at all that day, no matter how many times I said I was sorry, that I really liked her mom, that I didn't mean anything. She wouldn't listen. The sound of the piano shatters the memory. I roll over and bury my face into the pillow, hating myself for what I said. It doesn't matter that I was 7. She was hurting. I should have known. I should have been more sensitive. I don't know what was worse, being hated by my best friend or seeing her red eyes, watching her chin shake and not knowing why or what happened. Not being able to help. I didn't know the hell her mother lived with every day, how she drank to numb the pain, how hard she worked to keep her daughter safe. I was 7. Life was about catching frogs and bugs, making rocket ships out of old refrigerator boxes. I couldn't know what she was going through. That sometimes grown-ups hide what they are. That they act nice, but sometimes they're really monsters. All I knew was my best friend was hurting, and I couldn't even ask why. I went to bed early that night and stared out across the yard to her bedroom window opposite mine at her drawn curtains. I tried reaching her on the walkie-talkie, but she didn't answer. Instead, her room went dark. I couldn't sleep, not with that tingly, empty feeling in my stomach. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, at the Transformers poster hanging over my bed, wishing I could turn into something else too. Something that wasn't me. Someone that knew what to do or say, who didn't always mess everything up. Someone she'd forgive. A flicker of light danced across the robot's eye. I blinked. Another yellow flash, brighter than the last, lit up the whole poster. I sat up. A shaft of light pricked at the corner of my eye, drawing my attention to her bedroom window, to the flames dancing up her curtains. I ripped the blankets from my bed and raced down the stairs screaming, "Fire! Fire!" Mom and Dad's door cracked open as I sprinted past. Dad shouted something, and I was in the yard, running as fast as I could. Flames were already licking out the window when I reached her front porch. I grabbed the knob with both hands, turned and pushed the door open. Smoke rolled across the ceiling like low-hanging clouds in winter. I didn't think. I didn't feel. I ran up the stairs to her room through the open door and stopped. Fire covered the walls and ceiling, but it wasn't that, nor the indescribable heat against my cheeks and hands that stole my breath. No, it was the blood. The sight of her Care Bear comforter soaked red that stopped my heart. The twitch of her arm that started it again. I jumped forward, grabbed her by the wrist, turned and ran. Or tried to. Her body fell from the bed, but she didn't stir. I turned around, grabbed her other hand, and pulled. Her body slid across the carpet. I backed up and pulled again. Over and over. Through her door and down the hall to the stairs. The flames roared like an angry lion. The heat, the smoke, clawed at my throat. I couldn't breathe. Head spinning, gasping, I stepped down 2 stairs and pulled her. Her body slipped over the top and tumbled down. She slammed into my legs. I fell back, and then nothing. Voices mumbled somewhere at the edge of hearing. Noises that slowly coalesced into words, jumbled and meaningless. Words that slowly began to make sense, but not a voice I knew. Not a human voice. Too deep, too disjointed. No, you go. I'll sit with him. Blinking, I forced my eyes to open. Blinding white light cascaded all around a shapeless mass of color. A mass that spoke with a voice I recognized. Dad's voice. "Hey." I blinked, but his face refused to come into focus. "Dad?" I raised my hand to rub my eyes, but something kept my arm from moving. I glanced down at my hand, but everything was a blur of white cloud. "I can't move." Dad cleared his throat. "It's all right. Everything's going to be fine." My eyelids drooped. The theme song to The Polka Dot Door played softly in the back of my mind. Tingles of color tickled my body, filling every pore with numb sweetness, like sleeping in a bed of cotton candy. Clowns danced to music played by elephants and otters, but one thought pierced through the drug-induced chaos. Her. I jolted up as far as the restraints allowed. "Is she okay?" "It's okay." Dad's gentle hand pressed against my shoulder. "She's going to be just fine. You're both going to be just fine. Rest." My body slumped back into the pillow. She was fine. Chaos closed in around me, and I didn't fight it. She was fine. Nothing else mattered. Later, after initial treatment, Dad told me how he stopped to put on his pants when I ran outside, how he shouted for Mom to call the fire department and chased after me right into the inferno, how he found us in a tangled mass at the bottom of the stairs, unconscious, her on top, the side of my head pressed against the burning carpet, some polyester blend that melted and congealed against my skin, that clung to my cheek and claimed my ear, and that the doctors bound my hands to keep me from touching the bandages as I slept, to keep me from toying with them when I awoke. I don't know how long it was before I saw her again. Days? Weeks? Time holds no sway in hospitals, at least not for patients. Sleep comes at the whims of the chemicals being pumped into your arm and not as Saul's departure. Only the different faces of your caretakers hint that any change has taken place at all, but even those pass in waves of disjointed thought and half-remembered dreams. It was a new face that changed that, one that arrived as the painkillers began to release their hold on my mind. A kind, round face, that of a woman who took me for walks between treatments, who brought me toys and asked about my feelings. But it wasn't me I wanted to talk about. It was her. I badgered the woman endlessly about her, my friend, how she was, if I could write her a note, if I could see her. Eventually, the woman relented. She took me to a room with a wooden fort along one wall, a room littered with plastic balls, games, and tables with colored wooden beads that slid over tangles of wire fastened to their tops. She sat me down beside one of these, told me to wait, then went and spoke to a nurse sitting behind a window and left. I flopped my arm on the table beside the mass, laid down with my bad ear up, and flicked at a blue bead fastened around a red wire. Watched it slide up and fall back to the others with a dull click, all the while stealing sidelong glances at the pudding cup I brought for her. The only thing I had to give. My dessert from lunch. It wasn't enough. I flicked the bead back up the wire. I wished Mom and Dad had brought me my camera. I could have taken a picture of that bird yesterday, the one that sat on the ledge outside my window. The bead clicked back against the others. She'd have liked that. The door cracked open and the round-faced woman stepped back into the room. I lifted my head. There she was, peeking at me around the woman's pants with wide, frightened eyes, a thick white bandage around her neck. Heart pounding, I snatched the pudding and jumped up from my chair. "Hey!" The woman stepped aside. "Hey." Her gaze flicked to the side of my face, to the bandage where my ear used to be, and then at the floor. But the way she stood, with her hands behind her hospital gown, her voice so small and raspy, stabbed at my heart like hot needles. I needed to do something, and so I handed her my cup. "I saved you some pudding." Her eyes shone when they found mine. Her lips twitched, and for a moment I was back on the bus, waiting for her to run. Except she didn't. Her cheeks flushed and she looked away. A slow smirk spread across her face. Her hand crept out from behind her back and around her side, her fingers clasped around a little plastic cup just like mine. The pudding she saved for me. And just like that, everything was good again. We spent a lot of time visiting one another's room, swapping desserts, playing in the fort room, as much as the nurses would allow. It wasn't until years later that I learned what really happened that day. Some of it I pieced together from bits of conversation I overheard, my own memories, and what she told me. The rest I read decades later in the police reports, when the scars of her past resurfaced, when I went searching for answers, for help. The piano falls quiet, its notes soft and distant meld with the drumbeat of the clock. A shudder ripples down my arms, into my chest, and sticks to the back of my throat. But time marches on, cruel and unyielding, gatherer of sins, of scars, but sunderer of virtue, of happiness. Despite what I learned, what her father did, I couldn't hate him. I remember the kind gentleman he was. The man who gave me candy when I got a flat tire on my bike. How he made his tools talk as he worked, each in its own voice. The man who took us fishing on weekends when Dad had to work. But then, I only knew him sober. I learned, like me, he was a man with scars. Though not of the flesh. No, his scars had been carved into his psyche by the tender blade of a priest's touch. He drank to numb the pain of those wounds, and when he drank, those scars consumed him. He lashed out violently. When he sobered, when he saw what he had done, shame and regret ravaged him. Pain he also needed to drink away. A cruel, spiraling storm. The morning of the fire, he greeted the dawn with a shot of Jack. She came downstairs ready for school and found him in one of his rages. It was the first time he had beaten her. Her mother stopped it that time, but she knew from experience that now that his demon had seen her, it wouldn't let her go. More beatings would follow. Her mother had stayed because she loved him, because she knew his past and saw through the ugliness of the scars to the man deep inside. The man he was. She couldn't abandon him, not to the demons that were claiming him one drink at a time. All that changed the moment he took their daughter, the person he loved most in all the world, by the neck and threw her against the wall. She knew what it meant. Another part of the man she loved was gone, claimed by the demons. Their daughter was no longer safe. They needed to run. Her mother planned to pick her up after school, before he got off work, and drive to her grandma's a few blocks away. It was too close. They couldn't stay there, but they could get money, food, and then disappear. To where I don't think even her mother knew. But, as fate would have it, he was fired for coming to work drunk. He returned home to find her mother on the phone, saw the suitcase waiting by the door, overheard what she was planning, and enraged, broke her mother's neck. She told me later that he was sober when he got home. He told her that her mother had gone shopping and wouldn't be back until later. He made supper from scratch, pepperoni and black olive pizza, her favorite. Gave her chocolate ice cream with sprinkles for dessert, snuggled with her on the couch, and watched Care Bears on the VHS until she fell asleep and put her to bed. Then he started drinking. I can't say what thoughts crossed his mind, what venom the demons used, but sometime after midnight, he snuck into her room, slit her throat as she slept, and lit the house on fire. The police found his body beside his wife's in a corner of the basement, a single gunshot wound to his temple. Her with 3 shattered vertebrae in her neck, taken by his demons. But demons aren't so easily killed. They move from host to host, passed on by hate and violence. Being drunk, he didn't cut his daughter's throat as deeply as he thought. The pain jolted her awake, but the blood, the sight of his face looming over her in the darkness, the knife in his hand, paralyzed her with fear. She couldn't move, even as the flames spread all around her. I pulled her from her bed that night, dragged her through the fire as far as I could, but I couldn't take her far enough, not to free her from the nightmares he gave her, the demons. Her song quiets. I strain to hear each lingering, haunting tone, desperate for her to stop, unable not to listen. It's our song, our story. I wipe the tears from my eyes. My fingertips probe the edges of the scars of that day, scars that painted every moment of my life since, that made every day at school a living hell for both of us. With her parents gone, her grandmother took her in and wanted to move away. It was a small town. Her grandmother thought that going to the same school, seeing the same kids, all of whom knew everything about what had happened, would be unthinkable. The therapist argued differently. She said that throwing her into a new environment right now would be even worse. She argued that children she knew would be more understanding, lend her support and sympathy she'd never receive at a new school. But more than that, after seeing us in recovery, how much her and I needed one another, that separating us, especially now, would cause irreparable harm. And the therapist prevailed. It was her grandmother that first taught her the piano. Outwardly, because she landed on top of me and had been spared the touch of molten polymer, the only scar she carried was the white jagged line across her throat. But inside was another matter. The piano became her voice, her way of channeling the scars etched into her soul. Her pain shaped each note into something beyond beautiful. A passion, a language all her own, one that reached deep into the hearts of all who heard her. A cry that eventually brought her to Carnegie Hall, Moscow, Sydney. But in those early years, when romance first beckons the young to dance, it was only her and I. She, the star around which my world revolved, my one true and only love. And I, her dearest friend. As we entered high school, music soothed her invisible scars, but nothing could erase the marks carved into my flesh. Her sophomore year, a skilled violinist who wore no scars inside or out moved to town. A kind-hearted prodigy her tutor introduced her to, who played with her. She spoke of him often, how he flipped his head when his hair fell over his eye, the way his hand held the bow between his thumb and forefinger, how his eyes changed with the mood of the piece he played, and how beautifully their music melded together. I smiled each time, ever there, ever supportive. Despite the change in her voice, the sparkle of her eye, and the little smirk that squirmed up her cheek when she thought of him, despite the burning ache as it always sparked in my chest. More than anything, I wanted her to be happy. I knew, scarred as I was, I could never be what she wanted, the person she deserved. But he could, if only she found the courage to speak to him. But I knew the scars she carried, faded but not gone. I knew, crippled as she was, such courage was beyond her. And so one day after school, as he sat on the floor in the hall going over his homework, I flopped down beside him. "Hey." Blinking, he glanced up from his algebra. "Oh, hey." Algebra. That actually worked. I was never any good at math. I unzipped my backpack, tugged out my own textbook, and turned to the same lesson. "Sorry, I was having trouble with number 4. I unfolded the sheet I had tucked between the pages. "Do you mind?" I glanced up just in time to see his eyes dart away from my missing ear. Licking his lips, he leaned over to look at my work. "No, not a problem." He studied my paper for a few seconds, then reached over and tapped the tip of his pencil in the middle of the problem. "You got the value for X right, but then you got it confused with Y. That's why your values are messed up for the next section." "Oh." I stared down at the page in disbelief. He was right. I could see that now, but it meant redoing the entire assignment. "Thanks." "No problem." tossed me a nod, and went back to his own work. Ugh, it would take me all night to redo it all. I jammed the paper back into the textbook and closed the cover. I didn't even want to think about it anymore. It wasn't why I was here anyway. You have a secret admirer. Without turning his head, he glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. I'm touched, really. But I'm afraid my heart belongs to my music. He finished with a slight hint of a laugh. I meant your duet partner. The words burned like vomit in my mouth. He raised his head. Really? Yeah. I swallowed hard. She's crazy about you. She's just too shy to make the first move. The next day, he spoke to her. I'll never forget that day, watching from my hiding place, seeing the color rise in her cheeks when he called out her name. The way she bit her bottom lip to hide her smile, pulled the book she was carrying tight against her chest, and turned around. The slight tremble of her hand when he asked her out. How she swept her hair over her ear when she nodded. All of it. It was like swallowing knives, and the deep ache it tore through my gut, the crushing emptiness, destroyed me. I was, as ever, her friend. But as they drew closer, her time with me diminished, until we barely spoke at all. By graduation, we were all but strangers. A few years later, I received a wedding invitation. I didn't go. For years, I lost track of her entirely. Without her, my life had no direction. I dropped out of college, worked a string of odd jobs for a temp agency. I was a delivery driver, worked manual labor, whatever paid the rent. But life lost its meaning, its flavor. I stopped calling home, ghosted my friends. They were reminders of the past, of her, of what I did, what I lost. I didn't need them, didn't want them or anyone. I just wanted to be left alone. So I stopped hiding my scars, my missing ear. I figured no one wanted to associate with Freddy Krueger. It worked. I took lunches alone. No one talked to me who didn't have to, and I was left alone with my pain. In a strange way, I suppose that's what launched my career. The agency had an opening for a mover at the art museum. The job was simple enough: haul crates up to the third floor and help the artist set up as asked. As usual, the other temps did what they could to avoid me. When lunch came, I ate alone, out of sight and out of the way, but still there, still ready to work when lunch ended, which that day meant a paint bucket shoved between a potted plant and a column. I sat down, unwrapped my sandwich, and a voice asked, "Mind if I ask you something?" My hand froze. Sandwich halfway to my mouth, I turned my attention to a short, balding man in a white suit. The artist. My boss for the day. He flashed me a tentative smile and lifted a camera to his pudgy cheek. Picture? No. I turned back to my sandwich and took a bite. I was not interested in my scars becoming his muse. Oh dear. He scratched the stubble on his chin, waddled over and pulled up a paint bucket beside mine. Sorry, I didn't mean to offend. You didn't. I took another bite. Yet. Well, good. He sighed, sat down, and propped his camera on his knees. Have you looked at my exhibit? No. But I had. Photos of butterflies and flowers, all close up, all of some minute aspect that hinted at some deeper meaning. A part of me, a long-forgotten part, wanted to ask about those meanings, what nuggets of wisdom he saw behind them, but mostly, I just wanted him to go away. Undaunted, he waved his arm across the room. Tell me, what do you see? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what game he was playing, but I strongly suspected that this was just some roundabout way to snap a picture of the freak, something to add to his exhibit. After a long, awkward moment, he stood and laid his camera down on the bucket. I'll tell you what. I don't want you moving anything else today. Instead, I want you to take this camera and photograph the process. A smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. Boxes, your comrades, whatever you find interesting. With a wink, he turned, folded his hands behind him, and waddled back across the room and out of sight, whistling as he went. I watched him go before going back to my sandwich, eyeing the camera as I ate. Whatever I find interesting. Nobody ever cared what I thought, what I felt. Not since she left. I reached down and picked up the camera, a far cry from the Polaroid I had as a kid. I flipped it forward and gave the back a once-over. Digital, high-end, but just a few buttons. Seemed simple enough to operate. One of the other temps lumbered by carrying a ripped box. I zoomed in on his face, the deep lines carved into his skin and tired eyes, and snapped a picture. Then another of his hands, his dry and cracked knuckles. Next, a gash down his thumb where he must have nicked himself with the box cutter. All intimate stories that needed to be told. But once I started, I saw more. A sweat-stained ball cap tossed on top of a pair of worn-out gloves. A bunch of the others on break, laughing at a dirty joke. Dozens of pictures. Hundreds of stories. The artist loved them, said I had the gift. I had no idea what that meant, but he took them and after getting them printed, blown up and arranged, showed them as part of his own exhibit, but under my name. My chosen mask, a fabricated name plucked from my past. And just like that, I became an artist. The first picture I took that day sold for $325,000. Others followed. Years passed, along with my benefactor, Mom and Dad. But my art, my prestige only grew until at last I had an exhibition of my own in Paris, only an hour's drive from my own private chateau and vineyard, where I lie now. Her song crescendos like rain at the height of the storm, all but stealing the breath from my lungs. The same notes that brought us together. The piece she composed herself. Her story, our journey. Her soul and mine. The same outpouring that propelled her onto the international stage. The career that led her to the same city as my exhibition. At the same time. I couldn't bring myself to attend her concert any more than I could reveal my true identity. I couldn't stand seeing her, hearing her soul bleed into my ears, knowing her heart belonged to another. No, my face was never meant to stand in the light, especially not hers. Even there, among my own work, I remained unknown. My name a pseudonym I plucked from the past. I, the mysterious artist, the master who stood in shadow. Oh, I attended every showing, but in secret, always lurking, always listening. I had no choice. I needed their praise. I needed to hear it with my own ear. Just a pile on the scale, to balance the void in my chest, the voice that called from the inky blackness of her absence, the only whisper that spoke only of my worthlessness, of how even the price of flesh, of heart, wasn't enough to win her or anyone's love. And so, I was there, lurking, listening for nuggets of worth to toss on the scale when the guide passed by one of my pictures, one I had named Scars. A black and white print, a rag doll sitting in the rubble of a shelled-out building as if some little girl had set her there and ran off to play. The only color I added, the blood spray across the doll's face and dress. He gave his speech, told the admirers where I had taken the photo, a snippet about me being burned in a fire, a stirring warning about the horrors of war, and the group moved on. All of them, except one. Her. She stood there transfixed. Her gaze jumped between the picture and the plaque. The name I had given myself. The first name, our hometown, and the last, her grandmother's first name. Her eyes widened. It can't be. I shifted in the shadows, numb, not sure what to feel. She didn't look like the woman in the posters, even less like the girl I remembered. Her eyes carried the weight of time, of sorrow, though the scar across her neck was nearly invisible now. Had I not known, I wouldn't have seen it at all. Tears shone in her eyes, a sharp breath cut across the murmur of the tour group further on, and her hands jumped to her face. But I didn't move, not until she turned her head, until I noticed the pale mark around her finger, where her wedding ring no longer sat. Molten lead boiled up from the void in my chest. I couldn't bear it. Not that. Not her. Not after everything she had been through. I stepped closer. The soft click of my shoes echoed off marble floors and walls. Her hands dropped from her face in a self-conscious jerk as I stopped beside her. Who would have thought a silly photograph could hit so hard? She laughed, despite the tremble of her chin, and dabbed a tear from the corner of her eye, never glancing my direction. That man is a master. Her voice cracked, a fracture that shattered the ice encasing my heart. So much pain, so much regret. I needed to help her, heal her scars. And so, clearing my throat, I pushed out my chest and folded my hands behind my back. He's complete rubbish. No talent at all, if you ask me. Juvenile twaddle. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched her head turn in my direction and sniffed. This place has gone to the dogs. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes wide, mouth gaping. Then a single tear trailed down her cheek and she fell into my arms. In that moment, I knew why Saul spread his warmth and light upon the earth. For the flower. I would never allow us to be parted, never allow another to hurt her again. I would do anything, sacrifice anything, so she would never suffer again. I would be whatever she needed me to be, become whatever it took, do whatever I must, for her, so she'd never hurt again, no matter the cost. A long beckoning chord moans from the piano downstairs, and her song falls silent. A deep, piercing silence, broken only by the footsteps of time. Tick, tock. But it's over. For tonight. I take a shuddering breath and focus on the door, to await her return. After releasing me that day in the gallery, we spent the remainder of the day together, and then the evening. She talked and I let her. She told me of her career and marriage, how wonderful it was in the beginning, and how it soured as her fame spread and his stalled. The travel fame required and the toll it took on their marriage, how eventually, alone and feeling abandoned, he strayed. My heart bled for her as she told me of the pain it caused, but try as she might, she couldn't stop loving him. But she had forgiven him, tried to make it work. However, in the end, only the night before our meeting, he told her it was over, that he had chosen the other woman, because she was there. As we talked, evening became night, and night became day. She told me she had canceled her tour, how the nightmares, once vanquished, had returned. All of them. Her father's face looming out of the darkness, the flash of moonlight on his blade, the searing pain across her throat, visions that kept her from sleep except with the aid of medication. Fear haunted her every thought, and now her husband, her love, her support was gone. She needed time to heal, somewhere away from the spotlight. In a broken whisper, she confessed that she had no idea what brought her to my exhibition. Then she took my hand, smiled, and said, "But I'm glad I did." My heart soared. I showed her my estate, told her she was welcome to remain as long as she wished. I would keep her secret. Always. She accepted, and in the weeks that followed, arm in arm, we toured much of France. she began to smile again. For a time, we found a sort of happiness in one another's arms, though her heart remained with him. But then one day, months later, she received a text from him. Her eyes sparkled, her cheeks flushed. He wants to give it another try. Shaking, she held up her phone to show me. The dark, gaping maw in my chest ripped open. I knew what it meant. It was a cycle as predictable as Sol and Luna's, as unyielding as the ticking of my grandfather's clock. She would leave me, go to him, taking my soul with her, and he in turn would shatter her. Exactly as before. I watched her hands tremble as she wrote her response, the eager smirk that twisted across her lips. But I hadn't forgotten the broken woman in the gallery, nor the vow I made that day, to end her suffering. A vow that roared from the pit of my chest with a voice that shook my very bones. A vow I could only keep by breaking it, at the cost of my soul. Mist pours in the gap under the bedroom door. A thin, translucent shape passes through the wood. I lie frozen as she hovers past. Her ghostly eyes lock with mine. Her face twists into a visceral scowl, the same expression she wore years ago when I bathed in agony so that she might be spared. When I took her sleeping pills, crushed them, stirred the powder into her coffee along with the sugar, and when she fell asleep, carried her to bed. I sat with her, listening to her breathe, watching her chest rise and fall, slower and slower, until something went wrong. Her eyes burst open. She jolted up, gasped, and I was forced to finish her father's work with the only tools I had on hand, my very small pocket knife, and grim repetition. The shock on her face, the pain, horror that hardened to ice, the cold fury of trust betrayed, a piercing glare that stole the breath from my lungs then, just as it does now, an expression made all the more horrifying by her ghostly countenance. She doesn't speak, not until she reaches my grandfather's clock. Then she turns, taps on the glass, and moans, 3 more years. Her scowl twists into a demonic smirk, but then the first rays of dawn peek over the horizon and she vanishes like a forgotten dream. Shivering, wet with sweat, I roll over. 3 years. I whisper the words as a lover into the shriveled ear of the woman lying beside me. Until what, I don't know, but as I stroke her cheek, as her dry skin rasps against my knuckle, I can sense her spirit again, somewhere deep inside her dried-out husk, waiting for Luna to rise once more. Gently, ever so gently, I kiss her bony temple and whisper, "My love, I've given you everything, my flesh, my happiness, my honor, and my soul, all to end your suffering." A few of her hairs lay loose on her pillow. I pick them up one by one, carefully brush them in with the others, and glance at the jagged rip I sawed into her throat. Then, staring deep into her empty sunken eye sockets, I find the courage to speak. "What more could I have done? Why do you torment me? Why here? Why now? Will we not have an eternity together?" But I already knew what she intends for me. An eternity of torment at her hands. My own private hell. I shake my head and press my lips to hers. Even after all this time, she doesn't understand. Hell is a price I'm willing to pay.
Chilling tales for dark nights. tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, and welcome to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm your host this evening, Nicholas Goroff, once again filling in for Steve Taylor, who will be back next week. Tonight's story begins the way many nightmares do, quietly. A failed marriage, a lost job, an apartment that no longer feels like home. And then, a name appears. A therapist no one remembers recommending. An office tucked away in a building where no one else seems to work. A man who speaks gently about control being an illusion and chaos being the path to freedom. What begins as grief spirals into something far more unsettling, with the horrifying realization that some guides don't want to heal you. They want to replace you. Settle in and dim the lights. The show is about to begin. Before we get to tonight's feature, however, we'd like to thank our dedicated supporters in the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights patrons area. For just $7.99 per month, members receive ad-free listening, early access to new episodes, exclusive content, and our complete archive, with discounted annual options available as well. Your support helps us continue producing the immersive horror experiences you've come to expect, week after week. To learn more or become a member, visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com. Thank you for helping us bring nightmares to life, month after month. Originally appearing on Scary Stories Told in the Dark, Season 16, Episode 12, on December 15th, 2024, tonight's tale is performed by Malcolm Blackwood, the hell-raising host of that very podcast, with production by Aaron Sawicki. And now, without further delay, I present to you from author N.M. Brown, Chaos Beneath the Stars.
My life fell apart fast. 1 minute I was going through the motions day by day, then it all came crashing down. The divorce hit first. Marie had been distant for a while. If I'm honest, she'd been pulling back for months. Her weekends full of friend trips and work obligations. I tried not to see it, to just keep going. And then one night, I came home to a note on the kitchen counter. She didn't love me anymore, she said. Simple as that. At first, I thought I'd misunderstood. I read the note 3 times, holding it under the kitchen light, searching for some clue that this wasn't real. But it was plain as day, and there was no ambiguity in the careful way she'd written it. No fights, no long discussions, just her absence and those final words scrawled on cheap paper. The apartment, already quiet, became a tomb. Her toothbrush was gone, her half-empty mug wasn't on the counter anymore, and her favorite blanket didn't slump over the arm of the couch. It wasn't just the things she took, it was the way her absence rewrote the space. Every room felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out. I started sleeping on the couch because the bed didn't feel like mine anymore. Even the sound of silence changed. At night, it pressed against my ears, ringing faintly, as if trying to remind me that she wasn't there. Sometimes, I thought I could still hear her humming in the kitchen, or the faint creak of her footsteps in the hall. But, of course, when I turned my head, it was just the same empty apartment. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts followed me. Marie's absence was a hole I couldn't avoid falling into. My boss, Dan, called me into his office one afternoon. He said something about needing focus, but his tone made it clear he'd noticed the drop in my performance. I nodded and promised I'd pull it together. I even believed it when I said it. 2 months later, the promise didn't matter. The company was restructuring, they said. A group of executives from corporate came down and told us they'd been forced to make some tough decisions. They called it right-sizing, a phrase that sounded like a dull knife being drawn across a whetstone. By noon, half the office had packed their things and walked out. My box was sitting on my desk before I even had a chance to sit down. I made the drive home with the same sense of dread I'd had the day Marie left. My hands clutched the steering wheel like a lifeline. The world outside the car felt too big, too chaotic. I kept glancing at the empty passenger seat. Marie's coat used to hang there, the one with the small tear on the sleeve she kept promising to fix. Now, there was nothing but the faint imprint of where she'd sat weeks ago on the last ride we'd taken together. The box of desk supplies ended up next to the front door. I didn't bother unpacking it. I couldn't remember the last time I'd even cared about the things inside. Instead, I sank onto the couch and stared at the TV. I didn't turn it on, I just let the darkness of the screen reflect the hollow space around me. The days after that blurred together. I'd wake up late, not because I felt rested, but because there wasn't anything waiting for me. The bed remained unmade, the dishes piled up in the sink, and the mail gathered in a sad, unopened stack near the door. I stopped answering calls. Dan left a voicemail the day after the layoffs, something about networking or references. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Outside, the world kept moving, but it felt like I was standing still. The idea of stepping out of my apartment, walking through the city, being seen, it filled me with this inexplicable dread. Whenever I worked up the courage to go to the store or grab coffee, I felt exposed, like every set of eyes turned my way could see just how far I'd fallen. The city seemed colder, harder. Shadows lingered in the alleys, even in the brightest parts of the day. I started ordering delivery just to avoid leaving completely. At night, sleep offered no comfort. Dreams came in fragmented bursts, flickering like static on a broken screen. I'd see images of Marie, but her face was always turned away, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't reach her. Sometimes I'd dream I was back at work, but the office was strange, warped somehow. Its corners stretched too far, and the windows looked out onto nothing but darkness. I'd wake up gasping, the phantom echoes of her voice or Dan's fading into the stillness of the room. That stillness, it grew louder the longer I stayed alone. There were moments when I thought I heard faint whispers. I'd be sitting on the couch, staring into the empty living room, and the air would shift just slightly, like someone was breathing in the corner of the room, just out of sight. Other times, I'd feel the hair on the back of my neck rise, as if unseen eyes were watching me. My rational mind told me it was just the stress, the isolation playing tricks on me, but it didn't make it easier to sleep. The only time I felt remotely grounded was when I started cleaning. It didn't happen often, but on the rare occasions when I'd pick up the dishes or fold laundry, I'd feel like I was clawing back a tiny piece of myself. It didn't last long. By the next morning, the apartment would look just as hollow and lifeless as before. One night, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection. My face looked thinner, paler, with dark circles under my eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. But it wasn't just the exhaustion. I could swear my reflection wasn't moving quite right. I'd tilt my head, and the image in the mirror would follow just a half-second too late. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me step back from the sink, heart pounding. I told myself it was the lack of sleep, the stress. but the feeling lingered. It was during one of those nights, sitting awake on the couch with the TV off and the shadows feeling heavier than usual, that I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to talk to someone, to get help, anything to make this crushing, endless cycle stop. I don't remember exactly how I found him, Dr. Thalen Pryatt. The name felt familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. I couldn't recall anyone recommending him, yet there it was, his name scribbled on a scrap of paper I didn't remember writing on. It felt like it had appeared when I needed it most. The next morning, I called the number, and the receptionist scheduled me for an appointment later that week. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, as if she already knew exactly why I'd called. That's how I ended up standing in front of his office door, tucked away in a quiet building on the edge of the city. The gold letters on the frosted glass were small and unassuming. Dr. Thalen Pryatt, Counselor. For a moment I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I almost turned back, but something about the stillness of the hallway pushed me forward. When I stepped inside, I felt the faintest sense of relief. The waiting room was plain, almost clinical, with beige walls and a small potted plant in the corner. There were no other patients waiting, no sound except the faint hum of a desk fan. Before I could sit, the door to his office opened, and a tall man with sharp features stepped out. "Elliot," he said, his voice smooth and even. "Come in." Dr. Pryatt was tall, not in an exaggerated way, just enough to make you notice. His features were sharp, his cheekbones pronounced, and his dark hair combed neatly back. He moved with an unsettling kind of precision, like someone who never second-guessed a step in his life. His eyes, though, they were the kind of dark that didn't reflect light. They stayed on me a moment too long. The way he said my name gave me pause, like it wasn't the first time he'd said it. I followed him into his office anyway. The room was sparse, almost clinical. A single leather chair sat across from his desk, which was empty except for a notepad and a pen placed exactly in the center. The walls were bare, except for a clock that ticked just slightly too loudly. There was no sign of personal touches, no family photos, no degrees, not even the usual bookshelf cluttered with dusty psychology textbooks. It felt like a space that didn't belong to anyone, least of all the man sitting behind the desk. Dr. Pryatt gestured for me to sit. I hesitated for half a second, then dropped into the chair. My knees felt uncomfortably close to his desk. "So, Elliot," he began, folding his hands neatly in front of him, "what brought you here today?" I faltered, unsure of where to start. I guess I just feel like I've lost control of everything," I said finally. "My wife left, my job's gone, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing anymore." He nodded, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. "You've been through significant upheaval," he said. "That kind of disruption often leaves us questioning our place in the world." I wasn't sure what I had expected him to say. Maybe something more reassuring, something that didn't sound like an obituary for my life. But he didn't elaborate, didn't rush to fill the silence. He just waited, his dark eyes fixed on me like he was studying something beneath my skin. "I don't know how to fix it," I admitted. "It's like I'm stuck. I can't move forward, and everything I try just doesn't work." Dr. Pryatt leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the problem isn't that you're stuck. Perhaps it's that you're resisting the natural course of things." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Control," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We all cling to it, especially when our lives feel chaotic. But the truth is, control is an illusion. Chaos is what shapes us. Sometimes the best thing we can do is lean into it." His words unsettled me, though I couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the way he said them, like he wasn't offering advice but stating an undeniable fact. Still, there was something in his tone, something almost comforting, like he understood a part of me I hadn't even shared yet. We talked for nearly an hour, or rather, I talked. He didn't say much, only asking a few pointed questions that had a way of pulling more out of me than I expected. By the time I left, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd shed some of the weight I'd been carrying since Marie left. As I stepped back into the waiting room, I paused. For the first time, I realized how empty the space was. No receptionist, no ambient noise, not even the faint hum of a computer or phone. Just silence. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe he worked alone. Plenty of therapists did. The drive home felt different. The city, which had seemed so foreign and oppressive for weeks, looked almost normal again. I didn't feel that cloying sense of dread I'd been carrying with me everywhere. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I'd found something or someone that could help. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The dreams came, but they didn't feel as sharp, as jagged. They were strange, sure, flashes of indistinct faces and shadowed hallways that stretched on forever. But I didn't wake up gasping. I didn't wake up at all until the sun was creeping through the blinds. That felt like progress. Over the next few days, I found myself feeling lighter. Not happy, not yet, but less burdened. I cleaned up the apartment, made a grocery run, even called an old friend just to talk. The conversation was awkward and stilted, but it felt like I was clawing my way back to something normal. I scheduled another session with Dr. Pryatt. The second time I walked into Dr. Pryatt's office, it felt less daunting. The silence of the waiting room didn't weigh on me the way it had before. It almost felt familiar, like stepping into a quiet sanctuary. He was waiting for me, standing in the doorway to his office with that same calm, unreadable expression. "Elliot," he said, gesturing me in, "it's good to see you again." I sat in the same chair, and we began. This time his questions were more precise, cutting closer to things I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding. When I mentioned Marie, my voice cracked unexpectedly. I hadn't talked about her with anyone since she'd left. "I just keep replaying everything in my head," I admitted. "Every argument, every little mistake. I feel like if I'd just done something differently, been better somehow, she wouldn't have left." Dr. Pryatt studied me, his hands folded neatly on the desk. "Regret is a powerful thing," he said. "It has a way of tethering us to the past, convincing us we could have changed it. But what if regret wasn't something to avoid? What if it was a guide?" I blinked. "A guide?" He nodded. "Regret points to the things we value most. If you lean into it, face it fully, you may find that it holds the answers you're looking for." The way he said it made sense, in a strange, unsettling way. For the first time, I let myself think about Marie without trying to shove the feelings aside. The guilt, the sadness, the anger, they were all still there, but something about acknowledging them made them feel less suffocating. By the end of the session, I felt drained but oddly hopeful. Dr. Pryatt didn't offer reassurances or solutions, but his words lingered with me. It felt like I'd been given permission to stop running from myself. That night, I slept deeply. The dreams still came, fragmented and strange, but they didn't leave me gasping when I woke. I felt like I'd cracked open some part of myself that had been sealed off for too long. Over the next few days, I started to rebuild a routine. I cleaned the apartment, folded the laundry that had been sitting in a pile for weeks, and made a point to go outside each morning. The city still felt strange, like a place I didn't quite belong, but I kept walking. I even reached out to an old friend. The conversation was awkward, full of long pauses. but it reminded me that I wasn't completely untethered. When I scheduled my next session with Dr. Pryatt, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in a long time: optimism. By the time I stepped into Dr. Pryatt's office for my third session, the unease I'd been initially carrying had settled into something dull, like a faint hum at the back of my mind. I told myself it was nothing, just leftover nerves. The waiting room was just as empty as before, just as silent. Only this time, it felt like the silence was holding its breath, waiting for something. When he opened the door, I froze. He was taller. I was sure of it. The first time we met, he'd been imposing, sure, but now his frame seemed stretched, his head brushing the top of the doorway as he stepped back to let me in. He was thinner, too. His cheekbones looked sharper, his skin pale enough that I could see faint veins running beneath the surface. I blinked, shook my head. It was probably just the lighting. Stress playing tricks on me again. "Elliot," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "Come in." I hesitated for a beat before walking into the office. It was the same as always, plain, sparse, clinical. But as I sat down, I noticed the air felt heavier, the kind of weight that presses on your chest, making it harder to breathe. "How are you feeling this week?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. His movements were fluid, too precise. His dark eyes stayed fixed on mine, unblinking. I fumbled for words. "Better, I think, but I don't know. It's like there's this pressure, like I definitely noticed the progress, but everything still feels wrong somehow." He tilted his head, studying me. "Progress often brings discomfort," he said. "When we begin to confront what lies beneath, it's natural to feel resistance. Chaos is not meant to be comfortable, Elliot. It's meant to transform." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement. Dark tendrils, thin and writhing, curling from the top of his head. They swayed gently, like smoke caught in an invisible breeze. I turned my head sharply, focusing on him. The tendrils were gone, replaced by the sharp outline of his neatly combed hair. My heart thudded against my ribs. Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaky. He raised an eyebrow, his expression calm. "See what, Elliot?" I felt my face flush. "Nothing. It's probably nothing." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving mine. "It's not uncommon to notice distortions as you go deeper into the process," he said, his voice soothing, but laced with something I couldn't place. "These glimpses, whatever they are, they're part of the work." I didn't know what he meant, but I didn't ask. Something about the way he spoke made it clear I wouldn't like the answer. The rest of the session passed in a haze. His questions were sharper, more direct, digging into things I hadn't realized I'd buried. By the time I left, I felt wrung out, like something had been pulled from me that I wasn't ready to let go of. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced back. Dr. Pryatt stood in the doorway, his tall, lean frame silhouetted against the dim light of his office. For a moment, I thought I saw the tendrils again, coiling above his head like smoke. But when I blinked, they were gone. The walk home felt longer than usual. The city streets seemed darker, the shadows stretching farther than they should. Every step felt like it echoed too loudly, like something was following me just out of sight. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That night, the dreams came back stronger. Shadows loomed, twisting and crawling, whispering things I couldn't understand. and when I woke, drenched in sweat, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't sure I wanted to go back, but a part of me knew I would. By the time I returned to Dr. Pryatt's office for my 4th session, I experienced something darker. The waiting room's silence wasn't just oppressive, it was suffocating. The air felt dense, like stepping into a room where something terrible had just happened, but left no trace. When the door to his office opened, I couldn't suppress the shiver that ran down my spine. Dr. Pryatt wasn't just taller now, he was impossibly tall. His head nearly scraped the ceiling, his body stretched to an unsettling degree. His limbs seemed too long, his hands too slender, the pale skin pulled taut over his sharp bones. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but it was harder now. "Elliot," he said, his voice as calm and measured as always. "Come in." I hesitated, but his gaze held mine, drawing me forward like a thread pulling tight. His office felt different this time. The walls seemed closer, the lighting dimmer. I sat down, and for the first time I noticed his shadow. It stretched across the floor in jagged shapes, moving faintly as if alive. "How have you been feeling this week?" he asked, leaning forward. The way his body folded made my stomach churn, the joints bending too smoothly, like a marionette with invisible strings. My voice cracked. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know how to articulate that I saw his face in the shadows now, watching me, whispering things I couldn't understand. My reflection in the mirror no longer felt like my own. "I don't think I'm doing well," I admitted. "It's like I don't know what's real anymore." His thin lips curled into the faintest smile. "That's progress, Elliot," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're breaking through." "Breaking through to what?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He tilted his head, his dark eyes gleaming. "Understanding. Freedom. Chaos must dismantle the false structures you've built before you can rebuild." As he spoke, I caught it again. Those tendrils curling from his head, writhing in the air like smoke. This time I didn't blink. I stared, my heart pounding as they twisted and swayed, reaching higher, darker. "What is that?" I whispered, unable to stop myself. My throat was dry, the words barely escaping. He leaned back, the tendrils dissolving into the shadows. "What do you see, Elliot?" My breath caught. I thought I saw something above you." "Perhaps," he said, his voice almost amused. "Or perhaps your mind is simply opening." The rest of the session blurred. His questions were sharper than ever, peeling back layers I hadn't realized I'd kept hidden. By the time I left, my chest felt hollow, as though he'd reached inside and scooped something out. I stumbled into the hallway, not daring to look back. The air outside felt heavier than before, the city darker, its edges distorted. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The feeling that I was being followed clung to me all the way home. That night, the dreams consumed me. Shadows stretched long, spilling from corners where they shouldn't exist, and in every one I saw him, taller, thinner, his dark eyes piercing through the void, pulling me deeper into the chaos. By the time I sat down to record one of our sessions, I was sure I was losing my mind. I needed proof that Dr. Pryatt was real, that he wasn't just some warped creation of my unraveling mind. I set my phone discreetly on the arm of the chair during my next visit, its screen black, but recording everything. My hands shook the entire session. He was taller again. His head now grazed the ceiling, and his limbs were unnaturally long, stretched to a point that seemed to defy reason. The room felt suffocating, the walls pressing closer, the air heavy and stale. "Elliot," he said, his voice calm, deliberate. "You seem unsettled." "I'm fine," I lied, though my voice cracked. "Just tired." He tilted his head, the movement slow, deliberate. "Tired, yes. You've been carrying so much, haven't you? The weight of your regret, your fear, your failure. But you're almost there." "Almost where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, sharp and predatory. "To the truth." I couldn't hold back anymore. "What are you?" The words spilled out, desperate, trembling. "You're not normal. You can't be." His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than before. "What do you think I am, Elliot?" I pointed to his head, to the dark, writhing tendrils that had become impossible to ignore. They pulsed and coiled, faintly glowing like some unholy halo. "That! I see it! I know I see it!" He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked pleased. "Good," he said softly. "You're beginning to see clearly." My breath came in short gasps. The room felt smaller, darker. The shadows in the corner seemed to stretch toward me, alive and hungry. "I don't want this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Don't you?" He countered, leaning forward until his impossibly long frame loomed over me. "You came to me. You sought me out. You asked for help." "I didn't ask for this," I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. His smile never wavered. "Chaos is what you needed, Elliot, and chaos is what you found. You didn't find joy in your life anymore. You won't even know what you're missing, only what you've gained." The scalp atop his head rose, at first like a goose egg, then warping into flame-like tendrils. I bolted out of the chair, backing toward the door. His shadow stretched impossibly long, curling around my feet like it wanted to hold me in place. The tendrils above his head swayed and pulsed, and when I blinked, they seemed closer, reaching for me. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. "You're not real." He tilted his head again, his dark eyes gleaming. "Aren't I?" I stumbled out of the office and into the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. The space felt wrong, like the walls were bending in on themselves. The air was thick, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I ran without looking back, bursting out of the building and into the cold night air. When I got home, I played the recording. My heart sank. There was no voice, no movement, no sound of tendrils writhing in the shadows. Just me, talking to nothing, my voice fractured and desperate. That night, the whispers didn't just come from the shadows, they came from inside my own head. I couldn't go back after that. The thought of stepping into Dr. Pryatt's office again made my skin crawl. I resolved to cut him out of my life completely, no matter how strong the pull to return was. I felt like a part of me still needed to see him, but I ignored it. A week later, I worked up the nerve to call his office, thinking I'd leave a message to formally cancel. The phone rang and rang, but never went to voicemail. I hung up, then tried again later. Same result. No answer, no automated response, just endless, empty ringing. Something felt wrong. I decided to go to his office in person to make sure it was real, to prove to myself that he was real. When I arrived, the building felt different. The dim lights in the hallway cast shadows that seemed longer, stretching unnaturally toward me. I stopped in front of what should have been his door, but there was nothing. The gold lettering, the frosted glass, the faint hum of the desk fan, it was all gone. In its place was a blank storefront. The window was solid now, the room beyond completely dark. I pressed my hand to the glass, hoping to feel some faint warmth, some proof that it had been there. But it was cold, like touching the surface of a stone that had never seen sunlight. I asked the building manager, a tired man with a bored expression, if he knew what had happened to the counselor's office. He frowned at me, squinting like I'd just asked something ridiculous. "Counselor? Nobody's rented that space in years. Just a storage room," he said, walking off before I could respond. The hallway felt narrower now, the air heavier. I stepped back, staring at the blank glass as if it might change, but it didn't. The silence in the building was so oppressive I could hear my own heartbeat. I left quickly, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. By the time I reached the street, I was shaking. When I glanced back at the building, it looked smaller somehow, like it didn't belong in this world. At home, the whispers were waiting for me, louder than ever. Every shadow in the apartment felt alive, curling around me, pulling me closer. My reflection in the mirror stared back with eyes that didn't feel like my own. And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, I thought I heard his voice. "You're almost there, Elliot." I stopped sleeping after that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw him, not in the way a memory lingers, but like he was truly there, standing at the edge of the dark, watching. His form would shift, taller, thinner, his limbs elongated into impossible shapes. And always those tendrils writhed above his head, growing darker and more vibrant, pulsing like they carried some unspeakable power. I could feel him reaching for me. But it wasn't just the nights anymore. During the day, his voice echoed in my head, soft and patient, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You're almost there, Elliot." It repeated over and over, a mantra I couldn't escape. Even when I plugged my ears, it came from somewhere deeper, vibrating in my bones. I tried everything to make it stop. I turned up music until the speakers cracked, screamed into pillows, swallowed whiskey until my hands stopped shaking, but none of it worked. Dr. Pryatt's voice was inside me now, etched into the cracks of my mind. One night, desperate for answers, I flipped through the notebook I kept after our sessions. It was filled with scrawled half-thoughts, fragments of what I'd taken from his words. But as I read, the phrases began to blur together, forming patterns I hadn't noticed before. There were symbols hidden in my handwriting, spirals and jagged marks that seemed to pulse on the page. They weren't mine. I didn't remember writing them. I turned the notebook over and found a single phrase scratched into the back cover, written in a jagged hand I didn't recognize. "He is the chaos between stars, the last voice you will ever hear." I threw the notebook across the room and pressed my palms to my eyes, shaking. "This isn't real," I muttered to myself. "It can't be real." The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to ripple in response. They stretched toward me, curling like the tendrils I'd seen above his head. For the first time, I noticed something else in the darkness, faint pinpricks of light, scattered like stars in the void. They pulsed, growing brighter and dimmer, as if alive. Then I felt it, his presence, not imagined, not in my mind, but truly there, standing behind me. "You've finally seen it," he said, his voice so close it made my skin crawl. I turned, expecting him to be there, towering and impossible, but I was alone. The apartment was silent again, but the shadows didn't recede. They lingered, darker than before, coiling like they were waiting for something. I tried to run. I grabbed my coat, my keys, anything to get out of that suffocating space. But when I stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the hallway anymore. The air was thick, suffused with a faint hum that vibrated in my chest. The walls stretched endlessly in both directions, pulsating as though alive. And at the far end, where there should have been an elevator, there was only darkness, deep and infinite. I felt it pulling at me, dragging me forward even as my legs refused to move. Dr. Pryatt's voice came again, smooth and deliberate. "This is what you asked for, Elliot. The truth." "No," I whispered, backing away. "I didn't ask for this." "But you did," he said, his voice filling the space. "You sought me out. You wanted freedom, and now you are free." The darkness surged toward me, spilling out of the walls like a living thing. I turned and ran, but the hallway twisted and shifted with every step. The lights above flickered, casting strange shadows that stretched and twisted, mocking me. And then, ahead of me, he appeared. Dr. Pryatt stood impossibly tall, his head scraping the pulsating ceiling. His face was sharper now, the skin stretched so tightly over his bones that it seemed ready to tear. His tendrils had grown, writhing wildly, their tips sparking faintly with flickers of sickly yellow light. His eyes, empty and black, locked onto mine. "You were never meant to understand," he said, stepping toward me. His voice was deeper now, layered, as though it carried the echoes of countless others speaking in unison. "I am the last step, Elliot. The chaos that frees you from the illusion of control." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness closed in, swallowing the walls, the floor, the very air around me. And then he raised a hand, long, skeletal fingers reaching out. The tendrils swirled and twisted faster, their glow growing blinding. When his hand touched my chest, I felt it all at once. The weight of the stars, the cold expanse of endless void, the laughter of something ancient and cruel. My body burned, and then it dissolved, scattering like dust into the nothingness. I woke up in my apartment gasping for air. My heart pounded as I clutched at the couch, half expecting the shadows to swallow me whole. But everything was quiet. The room was still. For a moment I thought it had been a dream. But then I saw the mirror across the room. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't my face. It was his. Dr. Pryatt's sharp, angular features, his dark eyes gleaming with something I couldn't name. I stumbled back, clutching my chest, but his reflection didn't move. It just smiled. Now I understand. He never wanted to consume me. He wanted me to become him. The whispers are gone now. The shadows no longer scare me. And sometimes late at night, I hear his voice, calm and deliberate, guiding me, not as a patient, but as a successor. I am finally free, and I am willing.
You've just heard Chaos Beneath the Stars, written by N.M. Brown, performed by Malcolm Blackwood, with production by Aaron Sawicki. This story was originally featured on Scary Stories Told in the Dark, and we're proud to bring it to you again tonight to highlight Malcolm Blackwood's exceptional work as both host and narrator. If you enjoyed tonight's performance, we encourage you to explore Scary Stories Told in the Dark, now in its 19th season. New episodes premiere every Sunday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel and are available wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. Hundreds of episodes await you, including an extensive archive featuring the unforgettable performances of original host Otis Geary, alongside Malcolm's more recent contributions. There is no shortage of terror waiting for you. Why not dive in tonight? And if you haven't already, please consider following Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, leaving us a 5-star rating or review, and sharing the show with a fellow fan of the macabre. You can even find more terrifying tales at creepypastastories.com and stay up to date with Evil Idol 2025 and all our latest releases by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Of course, be sure to check out Scary Stories Told in the Dark, now in its 19th season, with new episodes premiering every Sunday on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel or wherever your favorite podcasts can be found. Hundreds of episodes await you, including an extensive archive featuring the unforgettable performances of Otis Geary, alongside newer installments hosted by Malcolm Blackwood. Memberships are available now at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, offering ad-free listening, early access, exclusive content, and our complete archive for $7.99 per month with discounted annual options. Follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok, and as always, thank you for spending part of your night with us. And now, fellow lover of the macabre, I'm afraid our evening together draws to a close. You've been listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Until next time, I'm your host, Nicholas Goroff, filling in for Steve Taylor, reminding you to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listeners. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I'll be the first to admit that I'm not what you or anyone would call a productive member of society. I've never held a steady job. I don't see the point in wasting money on college for a degree I'm never going to use, and I barely graduated high school. I enjoy doing what I do. I spend my days watching TV, playing video games, and getting drunk in my mom's basement. What's the point in getting a job anyway? It's not like I need money for anything. I live in my mom's house that she inherited from my grandfather that he had already paid off when he was still alive, so there's no mortgage payment. And my mom buys all the food I need and whatever else I ask her to get. Why would I want to spend my days working at a job I hate when I can just sleep and do whatever else I want? I suppose one could make the argument that it would be embarrassing to bring a woman over to my mom's house to have sex, but I don't really see the need for dating either. If I get horny enough, I just watch some porn. And then 5 minutes later, I'm good again. No awkward after-sex conversations or trying to get her to leave afterwards. I just either go back to watching TV or fall asleep. My life is perfect. Correction, was perfect. Everything changed for me the other day. I'm still not quite sure how, but everything seemed to go to hell pretty quick. The day started out just like any other. I woke up, played some video games, ate breakfast, and then went back to playing video games. Everything was going great until my mom started nagging me from upstairs.
Frank?
She called down. I didn't answer her. I was too busy strategizing my next combat move and trying not to get killed by other players.
Frank!
She yelled again, louder this time. What? I yelled back upstairs, not bothering to take my eyes off the battlefield I was in and barely even paying any attention to her.
I'm going out to run some errands.
She shouted.
While I'm gone, I want you to vacuum upstairs and put the dishes away.
I groaned in response. Why did I have to do anything? This was her house. If she wanted it clean, then she should just fucking clean it and leave me alone.
Did you hear me?
She called down. Yeah, I heard you, I shouted back up at her.
Get it done.
She yelled back.
I don't ask much of you, but if you're going to live here for free, the least you can do is help out around the house.
The least I could do would be fucking nothing, I muttered to myself.
I'll be back in a while.
She called out again. I grunted in response and returned my full attention back to the game I was playing. Needless to say, I didn't clean the house or do anything my mom had asked. In fact, I hadn't gotten up at all since she left. At some point, I turned off the game and rolled back onto my bed and fell asleep for a while. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. I decided I had better go take a piss and then grab something to eat from the kitchen. Hey, Mom! What'd you get for us to eat? I shouted as I walked up the stairs from my basement room to the kitchen. My mom didn't answer me. Mom? I asked again. There was still no answer. I looked out into the driveway and saw her car parked there, so I knew she had to be home. Fuck it. I opened the fridge and grabbed some lunch meat to make myself a sandwich. When I closed the door, I saw my mom walking towards me, and I let the lunch meat fall to the floor. Fucking hell! I yelled in shock. My mom was hideous. Her skin looked rotted. Her eyes were milky white, and when she spoke, a low moan came from her throat. Stay back, Mom! I yelled as I backed away from her. The thing that used to be my mom groaned and reached her gross, decaying arms out towards me. I said, stay away from me! I shouted again, as my hand felt around the kitchen counter, never once taking my eyes off her. My hand grasped the hilt of something, and without looking to see what it was, I swung it towards my mother's head. The kitchen knife stuck out of my mother's forehead as she staggered backwards, an almost confused look on her disgusting face as she uttered another low groan. Quickly, I stepped back and began rummaging through the kitchen drawers. A feeling of excitement crept over me as I spotted the meat cleaver and grabbed it. Without waiting for my mother to recover, I brought the cleaver down on my mother's head over and over again until it was split down to her nose. She was finally dead. Well, dead. I had destroyed her brain. Anyone who's ever seen a zombie movie or played a video game knows that's the only sure way to kill a zombie. I backed away from my mother's corpse until my back was against the wall and then slowly slid to the ground. What have I done? I thought to myself. My mom is dead. My mom is dead and I killed her. No, I told myself. No, I didn't kill her. She was already dead. Something else killed her and turned her into a flesh-eating zombie. I did what I had to do, otherwise I'd be dead too. Several thoughts went through my head at once. Who turned my mom into a zombie? How long did it take for her to turn? How many more of them were there? Banging at the front door caught my attention and snapped me out of my thoughts. Cautiously, I made my way over to the door and slowly moved my head close enough to look through the peephole. Christ almighty, I whispered out loud to no one. At least 3 zombies, all males, as far as I could tell, were making their way towards the outside of my door. I jumped back when one of them began pounding on the door, groaning loudly. I quickly slid the deadbolt and the other 2 locks on the door in place. They're everywhere. I thought to myself as I backed away from the door, trying to think about what to do next. I made a run for the basement. I know what to do. I have to stop this as much as I can, I thought to myself as I got to the basement floor and made my way to the door at the back of my room. I have to save whoever I can. I opened the door, and a wave of relief washed over me as I looked at the wide array of guns and ammunition that was displayed before me. My grandfather had been a huge gun advocate, and a bit of a conspiracy nut when he was alive. At least, I thought he was a nut at the time. Now, I was just glad he had stockpiled the basement with so many weapons. I knew that I had to be practical. AK-47s may be able to shoot a lot of rounds, but they were heavy to carry, and I didn't want to have to worry about wasting bullets. I figured I could always come back for those guns later, if I needed to. I grabbed a standard 9mm that was able to hold 20 rounds of ammo plus one in the chamber, for a total of 21 shots until I would need to reload a new clip. Ammunition was going to be the key here, not the number of guns I could carry. This wasn't like the movies, where the hero looked cool, shooting a gun in each hand. That wasn't practical or realistic. It was smarter to have one gun and as many clips of spare ammo that I could carry with me. I tucked the 9mm into the waistband of my pants, 2 clips of ammo forward in each of my front pockets, as well as one more in each of my back pockets for a total of 6 ammo clips. That was the total of 147 bullets, including the clip already loaded. I also loaded a 12-gauge shotgun with 6 rounds and dumped a whole case of ammo for it into a small backpack that was also in the room. The 9mm was good, but I wanted to bring something extra that packed a more powerful blast in case I needed it. I threw a few more clips for the 9mm into the backpack as well, along with 3 grenades that my grandfather had stored there. Those were definitely going to be for an emergency-only scenario. I stared at the beautiful Colt Python 357 Magnum that I was leaving behind. But again, it wouldn't be practical to take it. It had a kind of powerful kick to it and could do some real damage, but it could only hold 6 shots and took a long time to empty spent bullets and reload new ones. No. I would leave here along with the AK-47s. Could always come back later. Right now, I needed speed and accuracy to be on my side. I heard the banging at the front door from upstairs getting louder and louder, and realized that more zombies must be trying to get in. This is where the shotgun would come in handy. I grabbed the backpack and slung it over my shoulders as I ran upstairs. I stopped in front of the door and took several deep breaths before slowly sliding back the deadbolt and unlocking the door. Then I quickly threw open the door, raised the shotgun, and fired. An explosion of blood and gore was spattered on the grass as the zombie closest to me had been thrown backwards by the blast. A now nearly headless body lying still as blood pulsed from the wound. "Yes!" I shouted out loud. "Headshot!" A loud groan made me turn to my left as what used to be a large black man reached out for me. "Shit!" I said, as I raised the shotgun up quickly while pulling the trigger just as the zombie grabbed me. The blast blew off the top of the zombie's head, leaving only his lower jaw and wagging tongue still attached to his neck. I pushed the corpse off of me and got to my feet as fast as I could. "Double shit!" I shouted as another zombie was coming towards me, more quickly than I would have thought as I pulled the trigger. I thought the zombie almost looked angry at me. But then again, it was a zombie, and it wanted to eat my flesh, so who cares if it looked angry or not? I aimed for its head and pulled the trigger. The top left portion of the zombie man's head was blown off, exposing parts of his brain tissue before it fell to his knees and then crumpled to the ground. I turned to see several more zombies clustered in a group not far from me. Damn it, I thought to myself, as I quickly slid the backpack off of my shoulders and rummaged through it. My hand closed around one of the grenades, and I pulled the pin. Pull the pin, count to 5. I thought to myself, remembering what my grandfather had taught me about them. Or was it 3? Fuck it, I said out loud as I threw the grenade at the group of zombies. The explosion sent the bodies sprawling to the ground. The ones that had been closest to the grenade had damage done to their legs, exposing bloody tissue and bone. They continued to groan and crawl along the ground. I pulled out the 9mm and walked up to each one of them and put a bullet in their heads as they looked up at me. I could almost imagine that their moans were pleas of help. "I'm sorry," I said as I squeezed the trigger. I counted 7 bodies around me, counting my mother and the 3 zombies I killed in front of my house. That brought the total to 11. I turned around when I heard the familiar wailing of a police siren. Oh, thank God, I thought as I made my way over to the police car as it stopped in front of me. My heart dropped when I saw a zombified police officer exit the vehicle. "Motherfucker!" I shouted as I raised the shotgun to fire. Gunshot rang through the air, and an excruciating pain came from my knee as I dropped to the ground. "Fuck!" I screamed as I looked at the bleeding wound in my leg. "Freeze!" I heard the zombie cop shout out as it raised its gun at me. It shot me. The fucking zombie had actually shot me. "Drop your weapons," it shouted as it moved closer to me. "Stay on the ground." I began to raise my shotgun again when a thought suddenly screamed in my mind. Zombies don't talk. More information began to flood my brain. They also don't shoot guns or drive cars. The zombie police officer slowly walked closer to me as I heard it speak again. Really speak. "Do not move," it shouted, keeping its gun raised at me. As the zombie moved in even closer, its hideous, rotted features shifted to resemble a normal-looking man. "Drop your weapons," he shouted. "On your stomach, arms where I can see them." Confusion filled my mind. What the hell is going on? I thought. I could have sworn this guy was a zombie. The police officer kicked the shotgun away out of my reach and then reached into my waistband and tossed my 9mm aside. "Hands behind your back," he shouted at me. "Now!" I did as he said and saw more police cars and officers arrive. Some of them went to the bodies of the zombies I had killed, but most just stood there and looked at me in shock with their hands on their guns. The police officer who had shot me in the leg secured my wrists with zip ties before pulling me to my feet. Pain shot through my leg as I attempted to shift some weight off of it. "Franklin Brown," the officer shouted at me. "You are under arrest for multiple murders. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." My mind was still spinning from everything that just happened in the last few minutes. It took a moment for what the officer had said to register. "Murder?" I finally managed to say. "I haven't murdered anyone. I've just been killing the zombies that were roaming in the neighborhood." "Zombies?" one of the officers said to me as they forced me into the back of one of the police cars. There aren't any zombies. We had a call from several residents that they heard a woman scream from one of these houses, and then, when neighbors went to investigate, there were reports of a gunman shooting and killing everyone in sight. My mind was still catching up to what the officer was saying. No, they were zombies, I shouted at them. Check and see, their flesh is all rotted and decayed. Another officer stepped over to us. They're all dead, sir, she said. Gunshot wounds to the head for all of them. It looks like some had also been injured by some sort of explosive device. The officer who had shot and cuffed me looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. What the fuck did you do? He asked in a voice that was trying to contain his rage. I was trying to protect everyone, I shouted, almost hysterically. My mom came home and attacked me. I trailed off, trying to remember the events of the day. I had woken up, played video games, masturbated, played more video games. My mom had said she was going to run some errands, and then when she came home, she was a zombie. Wait, I thought. She came home. So when did she become a zombie? I tried to remember harder. I couldn't remember seeing any wounds on her before she attacked me. No, I thought. Not before she attacked me. Before she came near me. The faint memory of hearing my mother scream before I stabbed her with a kitchen knife echoed in my mind, followed by more screams as I brought the meat cleaver down on her skull, again and again. The only wounds on my mother's body had been the ones I had caused myself. Another memory of the zombies outside groaning in pain after the grenade exploded and then looking up at me, pleading at me with their eyes before I shot each one in the head. The faces in my mind shifted between the rotted, decayed flesh of the undead to normal, terrified neighbors I had seen almost every day. Oh, God, no, I said as I sat there in the police car, tears forming in the corner of my eyes. Oh, God, what have I done? What have I done?
Chilling tales for dark nights. Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Edward Harker waited in his office until the financial management firm of Harker, Parks & Associates was empty, and then took the elevator to the parking garage beneath the Manhattan skyscraper. He found his Lincoln Navigator and started it out for the first time in 3 months, and drove north on the Henry Hudson Parkway. He crossed the George Washington Bridge at night and plunged into the industrial wasteland of Newark, with its endless lighted spires over the electrical grid substation. He drove through the night, down I-95, then crossed into the peninsula of Maryland, pitch black with farmland. He listened to the radio. It spoke at intervals of a storm brewing in the Caribbean, slowly plodding and spinning its way north. Florida had issued an evacuation notice for its eastern shore. The Carolinas were preparing to issue similar warnings. It was all very dramatic, and the roads were empty. At about 3 in the morning, Harker crossed the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. It stretched a long line of electric light across the blackness of the bay at night. He couldn't see the water, just the black expanse that stretched on forever. A harsh November wind pushed against his SUV. He felt the great, dark ocean heave in the night. He reached Corolla on the outer banks of North Carolina by early morning as a light rain fell from an expanse of low, gray clouds, pushed northward ahead of the hurricane. The bridges to the island crossed the chop of green ocean. His was the only vehicle on the road. The wiper blades beat a soft rhythm, and he was tired now, all his regrets beaten back by lack of sleep. His 4-story, 8-bedroom beach house, normally rented out during the summer for $3,000 a week, had been empty for nearly a month. He stood on the deck of the 3rd floor in the cold rain and watched the surf of the incoming tide break far out on the sandy shelf before rolling white and gray onto the beach. The dunes were as large as mausoleums, and the wind picked up the sand and sent it stinging through the air. It was a northeasterly wind, and it shook the broom sedgegrass and dune elder, caused the waves to chop and the fish to cease feeding. At the edge of the horizon, the ocean seemed a vast and bloated belly. Harker left the deck windows open, took off his shoes, and fell asleep in his clothes in the master bedroom. Harker woke in the late afternoon. His cell phone had vibrated with so many incoming calls the battery had died during his sleep. There was a mist covering the island, which grew so thick it seemed the sea had mixed with the air. He took off his socks and rolled his pant legs to the base of his knees. He walked barefoot over the splintered wooden bridge that led beyond the dunes to the beach. It was cold, and the wet air sent a chill to his bones. The sand, which had overtaken and swallowed the bridge at its end, was thick and damp. He stood on the beach looking out at the breaking waves. The surf left saltwater foam on the sand that shook like beached jellyfish, then kicked loose and rolled like tumbleweeds. The currents heaved up detritus from the sea floor, and the hard-packed wet sand was littered with refuse, ancient waterlogged wood, bottles, broken shells, seaweed. The currents were so wicked he could see them. Rivers of water pooled through the surf as waves broke against each other, and were sucked back out by riptides. He walked nearer the sea, and the cold water ran up the beach and over his feet to his ankles. He could feel it, the power of it, the great storm generating kilotons of destructive force 1,000 miles away had somehow reached out and touched him. His white silk shirt was almost completely unbuttoned, and it rippled in the wind. Sand stung his face. He looked north up the misty, darkening beach, but could see no one. He turned south, and as far as he could see, it was empty. He walked north up the beach slowly, feet in the cold water, hands in his pockets, head down to protect his eyes from the sandpaper wind. He walked slowly. His mind turned, but he didn't think conscious thoughts. Indeed, he felt his mind to be blank, succumbed to the inevitable maelstrom. The cold water swept his feet. He walked until he could no longer see the bridge to his house through the rainy mist, and then turned and walked back in the growing darkness. He stopped again where the sand had overtaken the bridge walk over the dunes. There was only the light from the living room windows of his beach house, and he stared out at the tide. It had turned while he was asleep. He watched the shoaling waves, the fractal patterns and insane geometries of the capillary waves colliding, chopping, and frothing, piling on top of each other till the shallows were overrun with depth. The sea churned. It seemed like a cauldron boiling, but unmoved. The waves grew higher crests and deeper troughs, and the white foam rode them up and down and mixed and bubbled. Then, in the great rising and falling water, he saw something. A small, pale white face, sputtering in the surf. Edward Harker stopped and squinted and tried to look closer. He could see the tiny face, that of a little girl, gasping for air. He saw the small bone-white hand grasp for the surface. He saw her eyes and nose. He saw her mouth gasp for air, and he knew then he was not seeing a figment of pareidolia caused by the white water and darkness. His heart quickened. He called out, but the girl only struggled to keep her tiny face above water in the devastating troughs, 50 yards from where he stood. He looked up and down the beach. There was no one. No towels or beach chairs, no footprints besides his own. No family or lonely beachgoers. No sign of anyone but himself. He saw a tiny white hand break the surface again. Edward ran into the surf, lifting his knees high to his waist until the water pulled too hard and slowed him, and then he dived into an oncoming wave and began to swim. He'd always been a strong swimmer, competing in high school and then in college until greater monetary pursuits took hold. His arms left the water only to be swallowed by an oncoming crest. He kept his head up and focused on the girl's face, which disappeared and reappeared with each breaker. He closed in, the water too deep for him to stand, and the riptide flushing him out to sea faster than he could swim. Just yards away, he saw her face so clearly, saw her eyes dark and wet, saw her mouth open, gulping air and thin strands of wet, dark hair which clung to her face. She dipped behind a swell, and Edward pushed through, reaching for her arms. He crested the last wave, but she was gone. He treaded water, sputtering, breathing hard, swallowing salt brine. He turned and looked for her, but she was not there. He saw the beach, far away now. He felt his hands and legs heavy and freezing. He searched the water with his arms, dove below the surface and swam the swirling currents in the darkness. He reached and strained, but there was nothing, except an empty, swirling abyss. When he surfaced, there was only thrashing surf and dark sky, and the light from his living room windows to guide him to shore. Edward took one last dive and resurfaced farther from shore, nearly out to sea. He began to panic. He swam parallel to the beach to escape the rip current, and when he was far enough down the shoreline, he began to swim toward land. Waves broke over him and helped push his body closer. He put his feet down, stumbled to knee-deep water, and heaved for breath. His clothes felt an extra 50 pounds. He shivered and shook on the dark sand. He sat for a moment, staring out at the great black sea, wondering, questioning what he'd seen, or what he felt so certain he had seen. The white crests rolled like lips of a great dark mouth opening to swallow him whole, dotted with little bits of foam white faces. The police took 40 minutes to arrive at his house. There was only one unit patrolling the island during the off-season, and the nearest hospital was 20 miles away. When drowning did occur, there was often little that could be done. The officer stood in his doorway and took his statement. Still sopping wet because he had no other clothes, he walked them to the beach and pointed out where he swore he'd seen the little girl. The officers, a portly man, Officer Dunkirk, and a young brown-haired woman, Officer Tanaby, both wore jackets and wide-brimmed hats. They stopped taking notes. They looked up and down the beach. "It's not likely," Dunkirk said. "A girl that age will be out here on her own, particularly in this weather this time of year. Hell, you're probably the only one around for a mile. You do know that hurricane is coming, right, Mr. Harker?" "Low light and all the chop in the water can play tricks on the eye, sir," Tanaby said. "I almost reached her," Harker said. "I saw her. I was only a few yards away." "You sure it was a girl?" "Yes, I'm sure it was a girl. I could tell by her face." "About how old do you think?" Young. 7, 9 maybe. Too young. I have a 10-year-old daughter. She looked younger. I was that close to her. I don't know what she was doing out there. There was no one else. No one else at all." The officers spread out. One questioned the houses to the north, one to the south. Few houses were occupied. No one had a little girl, and no little girls were unaccounted for. They called into the island station. There was no reported missing persons, and so far, his was the only call that night. Harker sat on the couch as the officers conferred with the dispatchers at the station. Outside was pitch black. "You see, Mr. Harker, we don't have any missing persons reported or even pending between here and the mainland," he said. Harker, head down, nodded. "I know what I saw." "Are you all right, Mr. Harker? I mean, personally, is everything okay?" she inquired. "Why do you ask that? Have you had anything to drink tonight? Any prescription medications?" "It happens sometimes, Mr. Harker. People think they see things in the surf. It wouldn't be the first call I've answered like this where somebody thought they saw someone drown or go under. It's a trick of the light. You think you saw the face of a little girl drowning in the waves. It was probably just sea foam. It's rough out there and cold, and no one else is around." They left, and Harker stood fully clothed in a hot shower to wash all the salt and sand off his pants and shirt, and then put them through the washing machine and dryer while he walked naked through the many rooms of the house in the dark. He fell asleep on a couch on the upper floor. In the morning, he realized he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He dressed and stopped at Ike's Diner for breakfast, and then drove to the Food Lion for groceries. He bought beach clothes at discount prices from Waves, along with several pairs of sweatpants and sweatshirts. He paid with his black credit card that was thick as a page from a picture book. The clerk swiped the card and it cleared, and Harker was relieved the card hadn't been cut off yet. He stopped at a liquor store and loaded up with beer, bourbon, and wine. He planned to forget about the previous evening and the previous 3 months. He stopped at the local post office and scanned the walls for photographs of missing persons. There were only 2, both from the 80s. 2 women with feathered hair and grainy smiles, caught in some candid moment when the entire world wasn't being recorded and splashed over the media. A radio played in the post office. A voice urged people along the coastline to travel inland. The high gray clouds were building upward, layering heavy atop one another. The governor was going to make an announcement. Edward Harker left. He dressed in warmer, dry clothes, ate more food, drank some beer, and started feeling more like himself. He thought about the girl he'd seen, and decided that maybe he had been imagining things, a result of his overnight drive from Manhattan, the stress, the lack of food, the chop in the low light. Maybe he was cracking, but now he felt warm and full. From inside the house, he could watch the waves and feel more of the peace that he'd hoped for when he left the city. He turned on the television and watched digital images of the big swirling mass over the edge of Florida. Meteorologists predicted it would head up the coast, a Category 4, which could grow even stronger. Images flashed on the television of houses whipped with wind and rain, palm trees bent, leaves slashed the air. A storm surge rose and careened over storm walls and washed down main streets up and down the Florida coast. He turned it off and drank some more, then looked to the ocean outside his window and wondered how it would be here in his safe haven. What would it look like when the waves toppled over the dunes and washed into this house? What would it be like to stand on the porch and let the 130-mile-per-hour winds blow over him? What would it feel like as the storm approached? The landline rang and it sounded like a fire alarm in the silent house. He nearly jumped from his skin, his nerves frayed at the sudden encroachment. He'd forgotten there even was a landline. He stared at the ringing phone and waited. It kept ringing. He finally answered. "Edward? Edward, is that you? It's Meredith." "It's me." "Edward, they're looking for you. You need to answer your phone, answer an email, something." "How did you find me here, Meredith?" "I actually keep a Rolodex." "What can I tell them, Edward?" "Tell them I'm taking a leave of absence." "That's not good enough. It's not just the partners, Edward. The FBI, the SEC, and the IRS are here. They're actually here, in the office." "I'm out of town. I'll be for some time. I can't tell them that. They're talking about issuing a warrant. You need to come back here. Forward it to my attorney, Edward said. And don't tell them that you talked to me. What should I tell Lucy? You've talked to her? She called here looking for you. What about Suzanne? I haven't heard from her. She and Lucy are still with her parents in Connecticut as far as I know. Edward took the phone away from his ear for a moment, looked down, and sighed. He thought for a moment. He wanted some deep and meaningful message to send to his only child, but there was nothing. Anything and everything he could say would be meaningless. Tell Lucy that Daddy will be home soon. I just had to take a trip. His assistant of 20 years said nothing, but he thought he could hear her cup her hand over the receiver of the phone for a moment. What she was doing on the other end, he could only imagine. Maybe she was hiding the fact that she was on the phone with him, perhaps talking to federal officials, telling them where they could find him. He didn't know, and all he had now was trust, as tenuous as it was. I don't think I can hold them off much longer, Meredith said. Don't worry, you're not in any trouble. It'll be fine. He hung up the phone before she could continue, and then unplugged the line. Fronts clashed in the evening, and the swirling wind and rain blew both warm and cold by the time Edward was drunk. He watched the television. He saw nothing of himself on the news. Every channel talked of the impending storm, the first hurricane in 5 years, and everyone treated it like it was royalty. The swirling red mass that quickened its step up the eastern coastline stretched 250 miles across and sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. In his alcohol haze, the image on the screen became somewhat ominous and humorous at the same time, with the eye of the hurricane a deep black and the surrounding areas red. It came to resemble the profile of a human skull. Edward laughed and threw a beer bottle behind him, which smashed on the hardwood floor, and he cried out that the apocalypse was never ending. He yelled at the screen, "I'm not leaving!" He left his house in the brooding dust and walked to the ocean again. The whitecaps rose and fell like dim stars, blinking on and off in the great expanse of the universe. The wind was whipping. His clothes pulled against his skin. The breakers were crashing. He thought, in the distance, he saw a fisherman with his surf rod arcing up 15 feet in the air, but his eyes were blurred from the alcohol. He shook his head to clear his vision and looked again, seeing nothing. It seemed that everything around him was a ghost. He turned and looked back at the waves, and there, in the surf, he saw her again. A pale white face, struggling in the waves, eyes wide and terrified, dipping below the surface and rising. He saw her little pale hands break the surface. His mind hesitated, but something deep in his core urged him on. He didn't care if it was a hallucination. The sight of her struggle, the idea of slipping to her cold death in the raging sea, was overwhelming. He was in the water, the shock of the cold sobering him up momentarily before the blur of the waves and the shifting currents plunged him into a spinning morass of confusion. He swam, pumped his arms, kicked his legs against the froth. 100 yards from the beach, he stopped and looked about. She was gone, and he was collapsing under the crush of the waves. He turned in all directions again. She was lost. That tender, terrified face was gone again. This time he struggled back to shore. He swallowed too much seawater and collapsed onto his hands and knees, then retched on the beach. He turned on his back and sat up. The cold water was washing over his lap. He stared out at the ethereal tide and listened to the ghosts in his head, and he prayed to God that he could one day do one good thing, like save a little girl from chaos. But of course he couldn't even save himself from the chaos, let alone save his own daughter from knowing her father would be sent to prison. she would be a victim of it too. He stared out to where he'd last seen the drowning girl and, in the darkness, saw her face once again, struggling, gasping for breath. In that moment, he felt sheer terror. He stood up and knew he saw something preternatural, a memory drudged up from the murky bottom, set to toss about in the waves to torment him. Or perhaps a hallucinogenic product of his tumultuous mind, breaking under the waves of pressure. She struggled and gasped and slapped at the waves. She dipped and reappeared, her mouth opened wide to scream. But there was no sound he could hear over the crashing surf. He stood and watched her for an hour in horror, his mind spinning, questioning what it all meant. She never drowned. She never swam. She only struggled in the current. He waited till he was soaked to his core with cold, then finally turned his back on her and walked the bridge to his home. Every thought he'd entertained until this moment suddenly flushed from his mind. Edward kept trying to speak, as if his own words and sounds would suddenly make the world real again. But he couldn't summon the breath, or the words, or anything but a tearful squeak and gasp. In the night he wandered, dripping wet, bottle in hand, through the various rooms and levels of the beach house. The lights were off, and he passed before the windows and mirrors which refused to show his reflection. He eventually sat straight up on a couch on the top floor, staring out into the darkness at the seething waters beyond the dunes. In the night, he could see the white caps of the sea, and in them he saw a million drowning faces of a million little girls, struggling for breath. He woke to an alien sunlight over the coastline dunes. The water churned but looked restrained, as if holding back from the land. The bottle was on the floor beside him, its remaining contents spilled out. The salt and sand irritated his skin. His mouth was bone dry, and there was an ache behind his eye, as if they had strained too much. He felt lost and disoriented, looking out at the calm sun and slight breeze which bent the cord grass stalks. He stood and walked to the massive windows and wondered for a moment if he were still dreaming, but the pain in his head was too great to be imagined. His shirts and pants had solidified with salt over the course of the night, and the material was stiff and creased. He opened the sliding glass door to the porch. The air was light and unusually warm. He looked around and everywhere was silent, but for the crashing waves beyond the dunes. Edward turned and went back in the house. He showered for a long time, drinking the water falling from the shower head to wet his cracked throat. Images of the girl, what he had seen, coupled with a foreboding sense of death, flashed through his mind, and he tried to force them out. He was dried and dressed in the clothes he'd purchased from the beach shop. His head felt momentarily reinvigorated. He found his cell phone and plugged it into the charger, watching as it powered on and came alive again with text messages, emails, voicemails that had all been held back. The chime seemed to echo in the house for hours, and then there was the heavy-fisted knock on the door. Edward cautiously walked down 2 flights of stairs to the front door and could see an official-looking jacket and broad-brimmed hat through the clouded glass of the entry door. Officer Dunkirk, his belly spilling out over his belt, sidearm holstered, and barely noticeable against his bulk. "Good morning, Mr. Harker." Edward looked around as if expecting an armada to be waiting in the wings. "Good morning," he said. "Is, something wrong?" "Why don't you step outside for a moment so we can talk?" Edward stepped out onto the porch landing. The air was unseasonably warm. The light breeze seemed to be holding back, waiting. "I come here for 2 reasons," the officer said, as if orating before a southern congregation. "For one, we received a request to do a wellness check on you." "A wellness check?" "To make sure you're okay. It seems there are many people quite worried about you and wondering where you are." "Oh, I'm fine," he said. "I can see that. The second reason I'm here is that the state has issued an evacuation order for the coastal areas. Edward looked around at the bright sky and warm sun. Dunkirk half grinned. Oh, don't be fooled, Mr. Harker. This is what they call the calm before the storm. All the weather we've experienced this week has been pushed out, making way for the granddaddy of them all. It's not going to be pretty, and I suggest you start packing and leave. Landfall will be tomorrow. Oh, I see. May I ask what brings you down here at such an inopportune time? I was just looking to get away, he said. I needed to clear my head. Dunkirk stared at him knowingly for a time. A little solitude can refocus the mind, I suppose, he said. I understand there may be some issues you're dealing with up north. Nothing that involves local law enforcement, Harker said. Dunkirk smiled. Not yet, anyway. It's not really my purview, and I don't much care one way or the other, Mr. Harker. Powerful men have powerful problems. I've always preferred a simpler life. He looked around the empty streets and the empty houses. I can't make you evacuate, Mr. Harker. Probably wouldn't even if I could. But the truth of the matter is I'm getting the hell out of here too. These islands are not the place to be, even for law enforcement. When a storm like this hits, I don't have the time or resources to be making sure every individual gets out of Dodge. We pull our forces back inland, wait for it to blow over, and then come out to clean up the mess. If you think you can ride out this storm in this house, I'm sorry to say you are sorely mistaken. Now, whatever it is you're dealing with in New York is nothing compared to what's coming up this coast. Harker looked at him and then looked away and back into his home. I appreciate your concern, officer. I don't yet know what my plans are. Dunkirk nodded and looked down for a moment. That's fine. I understand. You know, 20 years ago we had a direct hit from Hurricane Samantha. I was only 25 years old at the time. It was a Category 3, I believe. We pulled back, same as we do now, and after the full brunt of the storm had moved north, we came back in with fire trucks and ambulances and a fleet of emergency electricians from the electrical company. You know, the guys that make a year's salary wading through all the leftover shit from one of these storms. Anyway, I just want to tell you so you know what you're looking at. We started moving up Ocean Trail Drive, checking houses, looking for anyone that might have been left behind, getting the electrical wires out of the road. Everything you see here around you had nearly been washed away. Houses toppled over, trees uprooted, cars taken by the waves and planted in people's backyards. Sure, it was bad, but most of it was just things, stuff, material objects that could be replaced. Until we got to 74 Ocean Trail just down that way. Dunkirk pointed south. The doors and windows had all been blasted out, and inside was an old man, sitting in a rocking chair. I knew him vaguely. Tough old bastard. The kind of tough old bastard that would rather wait out a storm than leave his house. But he was dead, sitting in that chair. The storm had picked up a bit of fencing and sent it through his window and right through his chest. Rain came in through the window, flooded the place. He was dead and soaked, and looking like a fish you see washed up on shore. Way it looked to me, he had pulled his chair around in front of the window to watch the great and powerful show. But you don't, and even I don't, know what goes on in the middle of these kinds of storms, Mr. Harker. Especially on these islands. We don't know because no one sticks around to find out. And the ones that do usually don't make it. A Category 3, Edward said. That's right. Not so bad compared to this big boy that's on our doorstep now. Don't let the pretty weather fool you, son. Take a look in the sky. You know what you're not seeing? What's that? Birds, Mr. Harker. They're all gone. And y'all should be too. Harker walked the beach during the day while the sky was still clear and the ocean maintained a cordial surface calm. He wouldn't come back out at dusk or night. not just because the storm was expected to make landfall, but because he couldn't handle any more potential lapses of his sanity. Instead, he walked during the highest sun and trudged far north on the island. After an hour, he rounded a bend which signaled the final tip of the island. He stood for a moment, legs tired from the long walk in the sand, but his mind feeling remarkably clear. The ease of having left something completely and totally behind. He decided he would not be returning to New York now or ever. If they wanted him, they could come find him. And then, he would take the punishment that would be dished out, much to the chagrin of rival hedge fund gurus and the public. He would be forced into bankruptcy, possibly serve jail time. He was about to be reborn into a new life, one of shame and unimportance, and most likely poverty. He was about to become a very small man, and that was feeling fine with him. His soon-to-be changed life was not without its regrets. Suzanne had married a rich man. She'd been bred to do so from the finest Greenwich stock, and now that his empire was collapsing and his fleeting wealth sucked up by the world, she would surely find another way to maintain her lifestyle. Marrying Suzanne had been a bad decision, but at the time he envisioned a different kind of life, not one corrupted by money, but one that was suffused with love. Between them, perhaps, that was a dream, but with his daughter Lucy, that dream could have been reality. He and his daughter were bound by nothing so superficial as money. She was the one thing in his life that could be said to be true and real. But he had become so wrapped up in his high-powered, high-stakes life, so lost in the chaos of it, he had squandered his opportunity to truly find a bond with her, to truly be a father, and to protect her. But there was still time. Now, with his former life being laid to rest, there would be infinitely more time. He would be a different man than Lucy had known, but he could still be her father. This obstacle in his life, the press and the federal investigation, could not break him yet. There were other ways to be strong, other things that could be faced down. He would weather this storm, and then anything beyond would merely be a desert of overcast skies. Being here and facing down the hurricane was a stand against it all. He took a last look at the dark strip of land to the north and turned his head back home. In the distance to the south, he could see a dark haze that built miles up into the sky. A stiff wind was beginning to pick up again. He heard something heavy move at the periphery of his sight. He turned and saw a lone wild horse hoofing the sand, spooked and shaking its long, triangular head. That night, the rain and wind started. The house began to creak and groan under the gale, to the point Harker could feel it shift beneath him. Spats of rain pelted the windows, and it sounded like some demented child throwing pebbles against the glass. He sat on the couch and watched the weather forecast on the television. It was only a matter of time before the power cut out. So, he listened to the last reports from the outside world. The edge of Florida had been devastated. Images of roofs torn off, uprooted trees, entire towns flooded underwater. Occasionally, the television newsfeed would cut to a panoply of 80s color, with a warning alert screeching across the audio. He sat and listened to the warning echo throughout the empty house. He stood and stared out the windows. His house was the only light in the impenetrable darkness. He looked but could only see his reflection streaked with horizontal streams of rainwater. Even the white froth of the rising ocean was hidden from him. A sound came from a floor below, faint at first. Harker ignored it as just another instance of the house complaining under the onslaught. Then it came louder and more insistent. Knocking. Someone at the door. Confused and concerned, Harker went to the front door on the second level, which opened toward the road. He flung the door open, but there was no one there. The wind blew him back. He shut the door and locked the deadbolt. The knocking came again, from the basement door on the bottom level, which opened to a concrete landing with the in-ground pool and the bridge to the beach. The knocks were heavy, like a giant fist was trying to break it down. He looked down the stairs to the dark rooms below. The knocking came louder. Harker walked to the bottom floor. It was a family room, with an old couch and television and a bedroom set off to the side, with 2 sets of bunk beds for renters with big families. The window blinds were all drawn shut. He flipped on the light. The knock came again, echoing throughout the empty house, threatening to knock the door off its hinges. Harker paused for a moment and then flung the door open. The light reached out into the darkness, but there was nothing there. He pushed his head out and looked left and right along the side of the house. So far, the landing remained fairly dry, shielded by the 2nd and 3rd story decks, although water was beginning to creep at its edges. Harker called out into the night, but there was only the sound of wind. He moved to shut the door again, doubting his sanity. He looked down and saw 2 small, wet footprints, fresh on the concrete, the bare feet of a child, come in from the rain. Somewhere in the darkened bedroom, a child laughed, and feet pattered across the floor toward him. Harker scrambled to the stairs, panicked by the sound of someone else in the house. He stopped at the 2nd floor landing, bracing to run, and turned to look back at the basement living room. The lights flickered and browned as the hurricane winds gained force. He caught a glimpse of something moving through the shadows, a flash of pale bare feet, and a dripping white nightdress. His senses whirled. He scrambled again as the lights fought back and returned fully illuminated. He ran to the 3rd floor. A child's laughter followed. He was back in the great room and the sliding glass doors that looked over the dunes to the sea. The lights were flickering again as the storm ripped away his last hope of being able to see. Then all was black and gone. The wind blew and leaned against the house like Leviathan had come ashore and rested his back against the side. It may have been true for all the darkness he knew at that moment. He was left blind. Then he heard the footsteps, light at first, like a little girl's, and then growing heavier as they turned at the 2nd floor landing and ascended toward him. He pushed against the glass doors and felt them push back with the power of the storm. His eyes adjusted to the dark so that he could discern faint outlines of furniture and doorways. He watched as a thin, pale figure rose up the stairs, footfalls booming throughout the house. He watched until she neared the last step. There was nowhere left to run from here, except the balcony room, a tiny windowed chamber that reached over the roof, a place that would surely be blasted out by the tearing winds. He turned to run, but she was already there, standing in front of him, her dark, wet hair hanging over her pale, drowned face, and her eyes frothing white. When she spoke, it sounded like a bell rung from the bottom of the ocean, and he could suddenly see. It was as if he could see all of it at once, the whole storm, the totality of the chaos. Night became clear as day. He saw cyclones churning between the sky and the earth. He saw the sea rise, and waves break over the dunes and flood the ground, break through the doors and windows of the 1st floor, rise around his SUV and push it back across the road until it rolled like a river stone. He saw the wind sweep down and break tree limbs and send them sailing through the windows. He saw a great and malevolent eye, shining down from miles above the earth. He saw a great force rise up from the sea. He stood in his living room untouched, as if he had been separated from time and space and left to bear witness to the things man cannot see in the darkness of his limited mind. He saw a great swelling out at sea as if the ocean were suddenly pregnant. There rose a sloping mountain of water that came closer and closer to his shore. The water split into streams that ran down its back. and a great beast emerged from the depths and slouched toward the shore. Its massive mouth let loose a dim blood tide. Its hands were filled with anarchy and deceit. It stripped away dunes and homes, and in its rage, it let loose a terrible screeching howl, like a 1,000-mile-per-hour wind. Everything was suddenly raised up into the sky. Cars and houses turned in the air like a toddler's mobile. Harker watched all of this. He saw. And the girl stood with him, her eyes flashing white, her hair dripping in an endless tide. The great beast lumbered toward Harker, secluded in his brittle home. It saw him, and lowered its massive head and opened its terrible mouth so wide it could swallow the beach house whole. Harker pressed his hands up against the glass panes and stared into the abyss of its throat. There, he could see, standing innocent and unknowing on the beast's tongue, Lucy. All seemed still for a moment as he gazed upon her, wearing the same clothes she'd worn when he last saw her, as if the beast had stolen her right out of his memory. "No," he said. "Why?" The girl spoke. "All are lost. No one is spared. The storm swallows them all." The girl turned and looked at Harker, her eyes washing white with foam. The beast snapped its massive jaws shut, and it sounded as if a crack opened up in the earth. It took the police and cleanup crews 2 days before they reached Kerala, and, in his 45 years on Earth, Dunkirk had never seen such a sight. "This was a devil of a storm," he told a crewman, and the old bird nodded in agreement. The whole place had been rolled flat as a prairie. Even the low tide was nipping at the edge of the multi-million-dollar properties. "This place might have seen its last," he said, but it was really more of a prayer. Dunkirk pretended for a little while that he was immune to the curiosity, that he was taking the problems of work as they came, moving with the crews northward up the washed-out island. But his mind kept wandering to Edward Harker. They spent countless hours trying to get power restored so the real work could begin. But finally, Dunkirk said he was heading off. When the chief engineer asked where, Dunkirk didn't say, but just hopped into his four-wheel drive and drove further north on what used to be a road. He found Edward Harker's residence collapsed, pushed over as some great hand had set its palm against the southern wall and knocked it out of the way. Across the street, Dunkirk saw Harker's Navigator. Beautiful vehicle that it was, upside down in some deep scrub brush, laid over with trees. Dunkirk sighed deeply. It wasn't regret he felt, but the knowledge of what he would find inside, and the knowledge that he had to go in to see. It was his job, and it was more. It was bright out that day and unnaturally warm. Dunkirk made his way around to the back of the house where a great tear had opened up the eastern wall and shattered all the windows to let in the ocean. The house itself looked like a great whale had washed ashore and been eaten open by the wildlife. He tested the wood with his heft a moment, snapped on a flashlight, and climbed inside. There, on what was previously the 3rd floor, now only a platform hanging precariously in the air, he found Edward Harker, seated in his fine leather chair. His mouth was open, his head tilted back at an unnatural angle, and his eyes white with death. A crossbeam of wood rose out of the center of his chest like the mast of a ship run aground. Dunkirk squat beside the man and took his hat off and held it in his hand. He said a brief prayer for the dead and for all those who have been lost at sea or drowned. He put his hat back on and cautiously climbed out of the wreckage, mumbling to himself of what a crazy, goddamned world it was.
Chilling tales for dark nights. Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Out back, the shed stood crooked. Cracked patches of mud marked the paving stone pathway that once ran the length of the lawn, laid in a haphazard zigzag by a gardener trying too hard to add character to a lopsided garden parched beyond saving. The shed door, long shrunk out of shape by a lifetime of turbulent British weather, hung by a single hinge and remained shut, not locked, just shut. There was no window. From the gaps between the slats that comprised the door, gaps that were narrow in places, wider in others, escaped only inkblot like threads of darkness, and nothing more. Whenever we'd wondered what was behind that shut-to, not locked, wooden door, which he did so lots of times, Nathan had asked his grandmother what she kept in the shed. Somehow she'd always answer without answering, if that made any kind of sense. She'd mumble something or other about noisy little boys and their inevitable comeuppance, usually just enough to start the cogs of his imagination turning, his attention shifting onto a new fancy, as little boys' imaginations tended to do, and then, without him noticing, his curiosity about the shed would vanish. Then, before he could pluck up the courage to interrupt his grandmother from her chores for a second or third time, it would be time to go home. Nathan's grandmother was an expert on avoiding the subject of what was in the shed at the bottom of the garden. Nathan was just a little boy, struggling to understand the world and its perpetual fascination with misdirecting the young. He had no hope of ever getting his grandmother to admit to the truth. But children are quick to learn from their environment, and realizing the futility of asking his grandmother the same question again, Nathan had taken his first tentative steps into mastering the art of deception. Knowing she kept a tidy house, he told her he'd seen a mouse scuttle across the kitchen flags and disappear somewhere inside the larder. Upon hearing this, his grandmother had spent the last 10 minutes on her hands and knees, torch in one hand, dustpan in the other, cursing her ill fortune. 10 minutes was more than enough time for Nathan to sneak out of the house and creep down to the shed at the bottom of the garden. Now he stood nose to door, one eye squeezed shut, the other peering through a gap in the wood into the murk beyond, his courage rising, falling, then rising again, his palms sweaty, his heart thudding against the inside of his rib cage. Squeezing his fingertips between the door and its frame, he gently pried it open. It shuddered free, showering him in dust. He glanced nervously back toward his grandmother's house, half expecting to see her marching towards him, skirt hitched, cheeks puffing, scolding between hurried breaths. But the garden was empty. She was still caught amid his deceit. His attention shifted back to the shed and its contents, of which there were none, except for a set of worn stone steps that led down into anonymous gloom. Nathan stood at the top of the steps and peered into the darkness beneath him. The steps descended deeper than he was able to see. He called out, not expecting to be answered, hearing only his greeting reply in echo. With his curiosity mounting, he placed his left foot onto the first of the stone steps. Aside from a creeping cold that permeated the sole of his shoe, all remained right with the world. Nothing had stirred in the gloom below. The monsters that in his mind had waited for this moment to pounce, either slept undisturbed or lurked imagined. Deciding that he'd likely not get a chance to explore the steps and their destination any time soon again, as his grandmother would surely keep him close by, once she discovered he'd been inside her shed, he took a deep breath and set off down the steps. After the first 80 or so steps Nathan had counted, the low, arched passageway that had been neatly carved through the soil and rock fell away on all sides into perfect darkness, taking with it the damp earthen smell that had polluted his nostrils. At first he stood still and unsteady, sure that to either side of him lay a drop so deep he'd likely die before hitting the bottom. Continuing down, his footfalls echoed with a decreasing resonance, causing his trailing footsteps to layer over one another, building into a frantic crescendo that battered his eardrums and rattled his teeth before ceasing abruptly, replaced by absolute silence. The unknown enormity of the cavern threatened his balance once more, and he was about to give up on his expedition when he caught sight of a glimmer of light far below. He continued his descent. For hours he walked, maybe days. It was hard for him to gauge the passage of time in silence in the abyss. Still, the light below him, distorted and orange, like it was viewed through a grease-smudged lens, drew nearer, and it was impossible to tell whether it was Nathan who approached the light or if the light approached Nathan. Down, further, deeper. The distant flicker of light became a vertical streak that burned with increasing intensity and grew longer, grew taller with every step taken, deeper still, until he stood at the bottom of the stone staircase. Before him, a wall of sheetrock, split cleanly in two by a searing streak of orange light, and he had to crane his neck forward as far as he was able, and still he could not see an end to the light that burned without heat a mere arm's length from him. To his right, something shifted in the murk, formless, yet quickly settling on a shape it deemed least offensive. The shadows shifted and parted to reveal the frayed outline of a man, slender and tall, taller than any man Nathan had seen. He was older, too. His features were gaunt and crisscrossed, with deep lines, each an abyss unto itself. His eyes were narrow, corrupted by eternal night. "You should not be here, little one," said the gatekeeper, his lips forming a practiced grimace, his teeth needle-sharp. "Far from the light you have strayed." With his initial surprise at the presence of the man subsiding, Nathan spoke. "Don't tell Nana, will you? I just wanted to see what she kept in her shed." The gatekeeper's grimace stretched into a grin as a trickle of pleasure stirred deep within the bowels of the form's impersonation of a gut. This one was young, his soul untainted, a rare delicacy, but he was untouchable, for the ways of free will had yet to assert their influence. "You want to be careful how you handle the truth, little one. Truth is a gift, delicate, easily mislaid. Beyond it only lies and sin." "Well, lies are bad," chirped Nathan, squinting at the light erupting from the rock face. "That's what Mum says." "Your mother is wise to the ways of the world," said the gatekeeper, nonchalantly seeking an internal record as to the current state of her soul. "Alas," he sighed, "she is destined for that other place." His eyes narrowed further. the wrinkled features of his face swallowing them momentarily. You should heed her words, lest I devour your soul. What's your favorite color? Asked the boy. The rubescent spray of arterial blood. Mine's blue. What's your favorite food? Charred flesh, or muscle, raw and bleeding, peeled from the bone. I like pizza best. What's your favorite TV show? I have no interest in the puerile distractions of the living. I savor their anguish, a feast on their pain. Mine's Ben 10. It has aliens in it. Another blasphemy. Perhaps he shall be damned in time. You ask a lot of questions, growled the gatekeeper, his torment rising. Nathan pointed toward the light. Where's that wall got a light in it? The gatekeeper was accustomed to frequent visitors, but not of the sort that wished to stay a while and chat. Amused by his guest's apparent fearlessness, and bored beyond the realms of mortal tedium, the gatekeeper suppressed his agony, brought his skeletal hands together in mock prayer, and spoke. "'Tis not a wall as such. Earth, comprised of rock and dirt, merely shapes the gateway to one of the two realms." Nathan blinked at the man and returned his arm to his side. "Think of it as a door," hissed the gatekeeper. Nathan craned his neck again. "It's a very big door." The gatekeeper nodded. A moment of silence followed as Nathan mulled over whether to ask his next question. "What's in there?" The gatekeeper smiled. "Heat and darkness, despair and pain. It is not a place for the likes of you." "Who's it for, then?" "The worthless and the damned." Nathan put his hands into his pockets and looked at the floor. "Is my daddy in there?" The gatekeeper knew that he was not, and watched as the boy shuffled his weight from one foot to the other. "'Cause my mommy said he was worthless." Humor was oft lost on lesser demons, but the gatekeeper was sufficiently versed in the ways of the living, and he allowed himself an attempt at a laugh. The sound that escaped the lips of the old man, guttural and impossibly loud, caused Nathan to jump. The gatekeeper noted the boy's discomfort. "Forgive me, my child. Your father is not here, nor is he in that other place, although that is where he will surely be once the time comes." The gatekeeper glanced past the boy, noting the shuffling presence that was lamenting itself down the final few stone steps. He ushered the boy aside, content that he would see nothing of the horror about to unfold. His light shall be barrier enough. First came the murderer, his clothes slick with the blood, his body cut, his wounds deep, matching those of his victim who now existed, free of pain in a place of incomprehensible beauty. After him the adulteress, her genitals exposed as a heaving mass of pulsing blisters, her lying tongue lolling between her sagging breasts. Behind her lumbered the gluttonous, an individual whose greed caused excessive misery to others, his body impossibly swollen, so that his hands and feet were all but stumps attached to a heaving, sweating mass of blubber, his eyes bulging from a face swollen by fat. They ignored the boy and his light, either oblivious to his presence or too consumed by confusion and fear to pay him heed. The gatekeeper had heard their pitiful cries long before his interaction with the boy had begun. Only now had they completed the journey down the steps of woe to arrive at the gateway to hell. In his experience, some took longer to make the descent than others. The will to flee the inescapable pull of the damned varied person to person. Their plays were in vain, heard already, 100,000,000 times before. often from souls far more deserving of forgiveness, forgiveness not found. Such an ugly concept. The gatekeeper shuddered at the idea. The mere thought of the word caused searing pain to permeate his essence, and he screamed in agony. Nathan jumped a second time. He could see that the old man was distracted by something, but was unsure as to what. Aside from a sudden chill that made him long for his blue winter jacket, everything was as it had been. The old man's mouth began to move, and his face twisted as to become almost unrecognizable, his features lost amid a mask of flesh that seemed to tear, and the gatekeeper, suddenly aware of his guest, looked at the boy, noting his rising fear. The rage of the 1,200 fallen souls subsided momentarily, and he quashed his anger, securing the form of the old man once more. The boy looked to be relieved, cold, but relieved. I shall hurry the damnation. The gatekeeper eyed the 3 pitiful souls kneeling and wailing before him. Without a word, without motion, he commanded the gates. The light emanating from the wall of rock intensified as the gates swung open, deliberate and slow, their size beyond massive, teasing an ever-expanding glimpse as to the torment below. Nathan watched, mouth agape, as the wall of rock parted soundlessly, the light too bright for him to look upon, and he turned away, not afraid, but somehow knowing this was not a sight for him. The anguished cacophony of the accursed burst forth from beyond the gates, swallowing the pathetic cries of the 3 sinners kneeling before the gatekeeper, consuming their twisted forms, accepting them among the chorus of the condemned. With a deft motion, the gates slammed together, silencing the infernal din. Darkness settled upon the cavern once more. Only the smudged streak of light that marked the seam between the gates remained. Nathan, shielded by his innocence, saw and heard nothing beyond the gates. He stood confused, waiting patiently for the attention of the gatekeeper to return to him once more. "What's your name?" asked the boy. To pronounce it correctly, I'd need to open your throat and pull your tongue through your bloody slit. "You may address me as Moloch." "That's a funny name," laughed the boy. "Mine's Nathan." "Nathan, I know who you are," interrupted Moloch, extending a bony finger. "I also know you should not be here, yet you remain. What are you doing down here all alone?" "Moloch, down here is where I belong. I serve the fallen Lord. These gates I tend, allowing in only those judged as sinners. My vigil is timeless. Those behind the gates must remain behind the gates. That is my sworn duty. Don't you get lonely?" The wrinkles in Moloch's assumed brow deepened, seemingly swallowing traces of what little light escaped the seam of the gates. Loneliness was a mortal condition. He was created to serve a purpose. Beyond that, there was nothing of interest or concern to him. Such was the order of hell. "No, I do not." The sound of distant footfalls and trembling voices caused Moloch to look up. Another sinner approached. "You should return to your home, Nathan. I have much to attend to." Nathan turned to follow Moloch's gaze and saw only the stone steps, empty and ending in darkness. "I probably should," began Moloch. "Nanny will be worried. It's been ages. There are lots of steps." "Do not worry. You will emerge from this place the moment you entered. Time holds no sway here." Nathan frowned. "That is to say," continued Moloch, "that your grandmother will not have noticed your absence." "Thank you, Moloch," said Nathan with a smile. "This has been fun." "I'm sure it has," grinned Moloch. "But do not come back. As he watched the small boy gingerly pick his way up the stone steps, passing through the gathering crowd of thieves, rapists, and heretics who stumbled over one another in a bid to plead for mercy first, Moloch wondered as to the nature of evil. It was evident that the boy, who had turned to wave his way a final time, held no capacity for evil, and that Moloch would likely never meet him again. He hoped he would not meet him again, as much as any demon had the capacity to hope, for there was still time for the boy to lose his way. The curse of free will claimed many an innocent soul as they embarked on the torrid journey the mortals referred to as life. As he watched the shadows consume the outline of the boy, it was a strange and uncomfortable feeling that manifested in his makeshift gut, one that he was only too glad to be rid of once he shed his form. From the shadows, Moloch glared at Nathan and the approaching girl. She, not much older than he, and like he, a stranger to this place both in life and death. "I told you not to return," said Moloch, stepping out of the gloom and staring at the girl. "See, I told you there's an old man living down here," gloated Nathan. "She didn't believe me." "I did believe you," countered the girl. "I just wanted to see for myself." Moloch grinned. "Girl, if sight is needed as proof, so that one may believe, you may well find yourself back here sooner than you like." "Oh, I don't think so," shrugged the girl. "It smells funny down here, like rotten eggs." "That's my big sister, Bethany," said Nathan. "She wanted to meet you." "Do you want to see my verruca?" said Bethany, kicking off his shoe and bending to remove her sock. "Oh, I enjoy the sight of festering flesh as much as any," hissed Moloch, his temper rising, "but one pus-filled sore looks much the same as any other, so—" Bethany lifted her foot and pointed it towards the gatekeeper. "The doctor said he'd never seen one as big as this." "It's quite the sight," said Moloch, averting his gaze from the girl's infected foot, instead focusing on the stone steps, hoping, nay, praying, for the welcome distraction of new intake of sinners. "She's got an even bigger one on her other foot," said Nathan. "Go on, show him." As the girl began to slide her foot from the remaining shoe, the final fragile strands of Moloch's restraint, a display of self-control that at any other time would have earned him a place in that other kingdom, snapped. The children had to leave and never return. With a growl born of timeless rage, Moloch shed the threads of his assumed disguise and allowed himself to metamorphosize into his true, demonic form. The children stood rooted, mouth agape, bodies trembling, a silent scream escaping their lips as the flesh of the old man split and tore, his limbs twisted and snapped, and all hint of the gatekeeper's human form was swallowed by a revolting mass of pulsing meat and blood. From its rear burst two spindly appendages, sending a shower of blood mist into the air, covering the faces of the children. From these appendages unfurled sheets of wet flesh, which flapped in unison and expanded in size until their span was reached. The grotesque mask, now a winged, writhing hulk of muscle, twisted and contorted, its center tearing in two, revealing a snapping mouth lined with rows of pointed broken teeth. A tongue, long and neatly split, danced this way and that, edging closer to the children who were still gripped by their catatonic state. Above the mouth, a single eye, open, bulbous, vast, and emanating hate. Their shock shattered by terror, the children turned and ran. They did not look back. "Tell your grandmother to buy a lock for that door," roared Moloch, relishing the freedom of his true form. "And next time I see you, I'll peel the flesh from your face." Out back, the shed stood crooked and secured with several gleaming padlocks. It remained empty inside, save for the stone steps that led down deep into the earth crust. At the foot of the steps remained the gatekeeper, whom, in those lingering silences, when he might relax his guard, did wonder as to the joys of a setting sun, a clear night sky, the soft kiss of falling snow, and to the well-being of the two children. The feeling in his makeshift gut had lingered on, gaining in ferocity since he'd been forced to frighten them away. It was a feeling the mortals had termed regret. He didn't much care for it. On the last step before the gates of hell sat a solitary, crumpled white sock and a pair of scuffed black school shoes. Moloch could have swept them into the abyss, but in those same long, lingering silences, they reminded him that there was good in the world. It was just that he would never likely see it again firsthand. Beside which, the sight of the shoes provided many wretched souls with a welcome, albeit puzzling, distraction, and in his few lighter moments, he'd shared the story of their origin with a select few, while they waited to begin their sentence of eternal agony.
Chilling tales for dark nights.